In the beginning, the Elder Worm created the world of Outramont. She looked at the darkness and said, "Let there be light," and when the time came for her to return to the stars, she entrusted the world to her children. Our dragon proudly proclaimed that dragons represent scaled perfection. They created the world for their pleasure, no matter what their rivals, the fairy lord of the farmers, may claim. For centuries, the victorious Knightsbane has stood at the apex of the world. Vainqueur hunted princesses, devoured countless knights, and accumulated the greatest hoard the world has ever seen. When the time came for him to hibernate, he retreated to his hidden lair in the Albane Mountains, leaving his trusted goblin minions to keep watch during his year-long nap. However, he did not anticipate the extent to which the world of Outramont would change during his sleep. Years later, he was awakened by a rustling sound. Rising and yawning, he mused that there was nothing quite like resting on the spoils of victory after a grand feast. He had not slept so well in centuries. But then, he heard the clink of falling gold and turned to see a human hiding nearby. The man trembled in fear upon seeing him. After a moment's pause, Vainqueur recognized the intruder as a human and shouted in anger, accusing him of being a thief. He expelled a burst of fire at the man, who managed to evade it just in time. Vainqueur then swung his tail and pinned the man to the wall. Mockingly, he told the man that after 50 years of hibernation, it seemed everyone had forgotten the natural order of things. He addressed the man as his next meal and asked for his name. The man, surprised, asked Vainqueur if he could speak. To this, Vainqueur responded in the affirmative, adding that he sometimes talked to his breakfast. He demanded the man's name. The man introduced himself as Victor. Vainqueur then introduced himself as Vainqueur Knightsbane, explaining that his name signified the great calamity of the age and king of the Albane Mountains. However, he permitted Victor to address him as his majesty. He added that his majesty was always italicized, and he could tell the difference. Victor swore it was an honest mistake, but Vainqueur doubted this, asking Victor why he thought stealing from him was a good idea. Victor pointed to a rapier and explained that he had been hired to retrieve it, as it was thought to have been lost. Vainqueur accused Victor of lying, asserting that Victor must have fought his way through a horde of goblin minions to get there. Victor countered that there had been no goblin activity in the mountains for decades. Vainqueur fell silent at this, lifting his head to check for his goblins, surveying his surroundings. Finding no trace of his minions, he became irate, accusing the goblins of cowardice for deserting him while he slept. Vainqueur then turned to Victor and asked if he had any minions. Victor confessed that he was once part of an adventuring party, but it hadn't worked out. He claimed he was the only professional with ambitions beyond petty theft. Vainqueur expressed agreement, noting the difficulty of finding competent help, advising Victor never to hire goblins. He offered to spare Victor from this mistake. As he was about to toss Victor into his mouth, Victor panicked and warned Vainqueur that others would come if he were killed, and no one knew he lived in these mountains. Vainqueur responded ominously, promising that they would find out once he set the countryside ablaze. Then, he asked Victor who sent him, because he was curious, and told him that he would eat them after he finished with him. Victor replied that he didn't know and that it was an anonymous request from the local guild hall. The reward was 1,000 gold coins for that rapier. Vainqueur told Victor that it was a handsome sum for such a dirty deed. Victor agreed but explained that he primarily took the job for the challenge because he thought he would gain a few levels from it, and maybe even a special perk from the climb. Vainqueur, confused, asked if a level was some type of food. Victor explained that levels were powers he gained in classes like Knight, Wizard, or Outlaw, and they granted him additional abilities called perks. He said he gained levels through work, experience, or by defeating enemies. Vainqueur told Victor he could not even begin to fathom the number of thieves he had slain and that he had never received any of those levels. Victor replied that perhaps he just didn't know. Suddenly, Vainqueur heard a system sound which startled him. The system then popped up, congratulating him for his sheer ego and noble dragon bloodline. It also showed that he had gained a level in the noble class in the old money class perk, which meant double the chance of monsters dropping treasure upon death. Focusing on the old money, Vainqueur asked Victor if he self-identified as a monster. Victor replied no. Vainqueur sighed in sadness and set Victor on the ground. He then instructed him to return the rapier to its original place and stated that he would personally escort him to the guild hall, so he could see the request for himself. Victor returned the rapier as Vainqueur informed him that, as he was short on goblins, Victor would be his new minion until he repaid his life debt. Victor, shocked, protested that he was wholly unsuited for the role. Yet, Vainqueur fixed him with a firm gaze and reminded him that he was a dragon, and Victor was now his minion. Victor, seeing many human bones strewn about, fearfully replied that it was a great honor. Vainqueur told him that it was very good and that there was a great reward in doing as he wished because any other dragon would have eaten him for his sinful crime and would never have accepted a human into their service. But he was forgiving and merciful. Victor told Vainqueur that it was very generous of him, to which he replied that he knew. He then walked towards the exit, causing Victor to sigh in relief. They stopped at the cage's exit and looked outside. Vainqueur ordered Victor to tell him more about those perks. Then, they proceeded to walk out of the cave. The man's name is Victor Dalton. He has been trapped in that fantasy world for 2 years. When he left the village of Valbin for the mountain, he vowed to return victorious or not at all, but things didn't go as planned. Victor told Vainqueur he should venture alone because the city watch had already sounded the alarm at his presence. He pleaded with Vainqueur to let him descend, swearing he wouldn't stray too far. Vainqueur, however, insisted that a king must show his face to his subjects, so they may remember who rules them. This made Victor worry that soon, his stomach contents might be on display for his subjects too. In the tower, the city watch aimed their weapons at them. The captain ordered everyone to target the dragon and put everything into their shots. They attacked Vainqueur, but he simply asked Victor where the guild hall was. Victor pointed out the Bell building. With ease, Vainqueur slammed his body into the barrier wall to demolish it, then proceeded to fly towards the guild hall while carrying Victor, inciting panic amongst the populace. Vainqueur landed on the ground, throwing nearby people aside. He then asked Victor to confirm whether the building they were standing in front of was the guild hall. On his agreement, Vainqueur strode towards the building and broke the door to fit himself inside, shocking the inhabitants. A woman at the reception desk asked Victor if it was him, and others questioned whether he had brought a dragon. He remained silent, and Vainqueur simply asked the crowd to point out the least expendable among them. A man pointed his spear at Vainqueur, teasing Victor about being afraid of a flying lizard. However, this bravado was short-lived as he was soon thrown into the wall. Vainqueur sarcastically inquired how their species had avoided extinction so far, as he would never understand. This caused the room to fall silent. Victor mused that he should have kept his expectations in check. Vainqueur then threatened to exterminate them all, causing the crowd to flee in fear. They couldn't believe that Victor had abandoned them, especially when they had once considered him a friend. Vainqueur then faced Victor and the woman, ordering Victor to do the thing. Victor addressed the woman as Charlene and asked if she was still free on Friday night. However, Charlene could only exclaim about the presence of a dragon in her guild hall. Victor introduced her to King Vainqueur Knightsbane. She was incredulous that Victor had brought the Red Terror of Midgard, an ancient red dragon, to their village. Victor corrected her by saying that technically, it was Vainqueur who had brought him. Vainqueur asked Victor who the female manling was and why they needed her. Victor explained that Charlene was the chief of staff at the guild hall and urged her to tell the giant, angry dragon about her role before he decided to eat them. Gathering herself, Charlene informed Vainqueur that she managed paperwork on behalf of the Gardemagny Adventure Guild. She received requests from clients and distributed them to adventurers. Vainqueur ordered Victor to tell Charlene to read the request that led him to his domain. Upon hearing this, Victor asked him if he ever spoke to other humans. He replied no and explained that communicating with animals is what a minion is for, which greatly irritated Charlene. She angrily grabbed the quest from the board, while Vainqueur asked Victor what the message entailed. She relayed that Louise Marquise de Caravas was offering 1,000 gold coins for the return of her family's lost rapier, last reported in the possession of the Albain mountain goblins. Vainqueur told Victor that his words seemed truthful, so he would be spared. He added that Charlene too would be spared if she could inform him where to find the Marquise, as he intended to eat her. This made Victor think that things could only end badly. Charlene responded that they should just leave, then she ordered Victor to hand over his map. She snatched the map from Victor, who was then tasked by Vainqueur to explain how it works. Victor explained that nobles, merchants, or groups of peasants send requests to the Adventurers Guild, along with proposed rewards. Since the end of the Century War, most of these tasks involved dealing with monsters or brigands. She added that there were once lucrative requests to take him down years ago, but those stopped when he was declared dead. Vainqueur was furious and asked Charlene why he had been declared dead. She explained that a group of adventurers had brought in a red dragon's skull 20 years prior, declaring it was his. He was outraged by this indignity and ordered Victor to inform his primitive species that he, Vainqueur Knightsbane, was very much alive. This made Victor panic, though he assured Vainqueur that the news would spread quickly once he showed a bit of force. Vainqueur calmed down and asked Victor about the types of quests an adventurer might receive. Victor, in turn, asked Charlene to read a few quests for their majesty's benefit. She read that trolls had sacked the lands of the Count of Provencal and were currently hiding in the woods of Jevoden. The Count was offering a handsome reward for the extermination of these creatures. This made Vainqueur inquire whether he could earn levels for completing such a task. Charlene was taken aback to hear that Vainqueur knew about levels. Victor explained that Vainqueur had leveled up in the noble class, which left her even more surprised to learn that a dragon could level up. He explained that Victor had recently informed him about the existence of this system, and he wanted to know how much humans would get paid for such a quest. Charlene, who was glaring at Victor, replied that the reward was 6,000 gold coins. This prompted Vainqueur to ask if he would really receive that much for simply eating trolls. Charlene clarified that it was considered a difficult quest and they would be facing Predanian war trolls. There was a moment of silence, then Vainqueur laughed heartily, asking if they were really scared of trolls, which he considered just a snack. He declared that mammals were so weak. Victor responded by suggesting that if it was so easy for him, he should consider an adventuring career and show them how it's done. He contemplated the 6,000 coins for something he usually did for free and questioned if it was the most well-paid request, leaving Victor stunned that he was actually considering it. Charlene informed him that killing the Massaline Kraken would earn 64,000 coins, his pupils morphing into gold coins in shock. Then, he informed Victor of his intent to raze the village to the ground as retribution for their crimes against his royal person. However, he declared that the unclaimed wealth was an even greater crime. He, Vainqueur the dragon, was ready to solve the problems of the inferior species in exchange for their coins. Upon hearing this, Charlene panicked, expressing her doubt that a dragon could become an adventurer. He confidently reassured her that he was more than qualified. She attempted to reason with him, but he firmly insisted that he was a dragon, and now an adventurer. Furthermore, he warned her that she was beginning to sound like potential prey. To this, she responded that she would register them as a new adventuring company, and that they would need to complete and sign certain forms. He called for Victor, who promptly asked why. He explained that he was officially promoting Victor to the position of his chief of staff and living signature. Victor was to manage the paperwork on his behalf. He assured Victor it was an important responsibility, but he was confident that Victor would handle it well. A system notification then appeared before Victor, indicating that he had leveled up to Monster Squire and Monster Kin. This meant that he could communicate with and understand any monster, and had gained a charisma bonus of +20 when interacting with them. He showed the paper with the letters V and V to Charlene, asking if it was a joke or if there was a better option. But Charlene simply pointed to the broken door, causing him to realize that their Friday date was no longer a possibility. He asked Victor for an explanation, but Victor dismissed it as nothing. Charlene expressed to Victor her wish for him to go to hell, although she suspected he was already there. And thus, Vainqueur became the first dragon adventurer, leaving Victor to ponder what could possibly go wrong. Later, they were flying in mid-air when he asked Victor what is a lead adventure plate, and mentioned that lead is degrading. Victor replied that every adventurer starts with a lead plate, adding that he had a lead plate too. However, he reminded Victor that Victor was a human and he was a dragon. Nonetheless, Victor informed him that he was a unique case and pleaded for him to forgive his species. A moment later, they arrived at the tribe. He asked Victor if these were the Troll Woods. Victor confirmed and explained to him that war trolls usually establish camps when they search for one. But he interrupted Victor, stating he would not sully his distinguished scales with troll dung and reminded him yet again that he was a dragon. Then, he gathered his firepower, causing Victor to panic and yell at him to wait. Meanwhile, in the forest, a lady was sitting down, picking flowers. She placed the flower in a basket next to a dead troll's head and a huge knife. Suddenly, she heard something in mid-air. She stood up, turned around, and was amazed to see falling leaves and a shining red light. On his part, he attacked the trolls in the forest with his fire, leading Victor to question what he was doing and telling him it was not eco-friendly at all. The lady, who had been drugged by a man, screamed upon seeing Vainqueur in mid-air. On the other hand, he was proudly telling Victor that the troll problem was resolved. Victor complained that he had set the forest on fire, to which he confidently agreed. The trolls were burnt to death and the others tried to escape. Victor commented that it was so one-sided it hurt to watch. But he reminded Victor that he was a dragon and that was what dragons do. He suggested that Victor should pray to him since he sometimes even answers, and asked him why he was complaining when he would get paid for something he could have done for free. Victor told him that flying was terrible when held in his palm, especially when he was breathing dragon fire down his neck. He told Victor that his discomfort must be due to his lack of scales and empathized with his situation. But he asked him what he could do about such a birth defect. Victor asked if he could ride on his back instead. He just looked at Victor, who was pleading earnestly, but he just asked Victor what kind of ungrateful demand that was. He told him that when he had found him that morning, Victor was a mere thief, adrift and without purpose. Now, Victor was his chief of staff, which led Victor to sarcastically respond that his trust warmed his frozen heart. He put Victor down on the ground, telling him that he should be grateful and not to demand too much. They were talking without noticing the lady, who was amazed to see a dragon and a man praying for mercy. They then checked the system, and Victor said that at least he got a Monster Squire level out of it. He asked Victor what a squire was and if it was a kind of minion. Victor replied affirmatively and explained that it paid just as much. He, having gained a level in nobility, asked why he hadn't received a perk this time. Victor informed him that he only gets one perk every 2 levels, causing him to ask Victor why only 2 and who decided that. Victor replied that he thought the gods had decided it, or maybe the farmers, while the lady and the man tried to escape. He called the gods, or farmers, good-for-nothing upstarts and shouted that they always claimed they made the world when everyone knows the dragons did it first. Then he ordered Victor to tell him where he could find and reprimand them. However, Victor replied that he didn't know and that he was not a religious guy, suggesting that perhaps they should ask a bishop. He told Victor they would find that bishop, but only after he recovered what was his, leaving Victor shocked and questioning what he meant. He explained that according to the old money perk, the trolls should have dropped treasures when they died, and he questioned whether Victor expected him to sully himself with ashes. Victor clarified that he was not immune to fire, leading him to retort, "By the elder worm, you mammals can't do anything." This comment irritated Victor. He then decided they would delay his gratification until the fires died down. In the meantime, he planned to obtain restitution for his previous employer's crime, to which Victor begrudgingly agreed to look at the map. A short time afterward, they arrived at a castle adorned with a flag featuring a cat in a shoe. He commented to Victor that he wasn't surprised she had lowered herself to hiring thieves, stating he would be bitter too if he lived in a castle with only 1 tower. The castle guards were surprised to see him approaching. He asked Victor what Marquise meant, to which Victor explained that it meant she was a noble lady. He inquired further if she was a princess or an elf princess, to which Victor responded that he didn't think so, and asked if dragons really kidnap princesses. His reply was sometimes, as the cat's guards began attacking him with arrows. Victor, fearful, asked him if he eats them. He simply swung his tail, sending the cats flying, while asking Victor if he took him for a savage. He replied that he released them back into the wild, so they could produce more princesses. Victor glanced at the collapsed cat's guards, praying to the gods that they weren't endangered. Suddenly, a voice from the tower shouted enough, and the Lady Marquise addressed Victor as Dragon Tamer, questioning their business at her castle. Vainqueur retorted that she had their relationship backward because he had tamed Victor. He then proudly reintroduced himself and informed her that she had sent ruffians after his silver rapier treasure, interrupting his peaceful nap. As a result, he demanded half her cattle as restitution, alongside the 1,000 gold coins she had offered for his item. She told him that his demand was preposterous, but he retorted that he had to fly for 2 hours to get there, burn pounds of fat, and smell the dung of her peasants. Victor added that Vainqueur had also scorched the local woods upon arrival, on the Count of Pruvincle's behest, so she owed him an additional 6,000 coins for that service. Then he displayed his adventurer's tag as proof that he was an adventurer, the greatest her puny race had ever known. She asked him if he would leave her lands at once if she granted his demands. He replied that it depended on whether she had more quests for him. When she stated she didn't, she ordered her guard to bring Count Gilbert for an explanation and told her cook to prepare a feast for King Vainqueur. She specified that it was to be a troublesome guest's feast with a special ingredient, to which the guard affirmed he would instruct the cooks to use the maximum dose. Then she told him that they would provide him with a feast and a reward for his noble deed. She expressed hope that he would forgive them for their lack of courtesy. However, he said he would forgive them only if her cattle were good. A moment later, the cats prepared a large feast with plenty of food, prompting him to exclaim that it was a splendid feast and he should visit more often. He then began to eat just as a man approached them. He asked Victor if this newcomer was part of the feast, to which Victor responded that he was unsure. The man fearfully introduced himself as Gilbert, the Count of Pruvincle, which led him to ask Gilbert if he was the one who had issued the troll quest. Gilbert replied affirmatively and explained that he had petitioned the Marquise for help to get rid of the trolls before he, the adventurer, had zealously solved the problem. He told Gilbert that he took his duties as an adventurer seriously, and advised Victor that he could eat the leftovers, cautioning him not to claim he was starving his staff. Victor glanced at the disgusting food and realized that Gilbert was incredibly nervous about something. He wondered if the special ingredient the Marquise had mentioned was cyanide or arsenic. Victor then stated that he couldn't partake in his lord's meal, asserting that it was all his. This prompted him to label Victor as a dutiful servant and to inquire if Gilbert had come to deliver his reward. Gilbert pointed to a pile of gold coins and said that, in addition to the Marquise's gift of apology, it was his duty as her vassal to give him the reward. He placed the food suspected of being poisoned in his mouth, referred to Gilbert as a good servant, and ordered Victor to count the coins and not dare to steal any of them. As he swallowed the food, Victor assured him not to worry as he regretted stealing from him every day of his life. Suddenly, a system notification appeared in front of him, informing him that he had gained a poison resistance perk by braving the poison. He asked Victor about the poison stuff and wondered if it was a kind of human seasoning. Victor asked if he didn't know what poison was, and he responded that he was aware it didn't harm him. Victor explained that it was a bitter spice used for special occasions and typically reserved for special guests. This led him to ask Victor if he was considered one such guest, to which Victor responded by asking who else he could be referring to. He stated that he didn't taste anything unusual and ordered them to bring him more of this special spice. Victor glanced at Gilbert, fully expecting this outcome, and wondered if they believed they could kill Vainqueur as easily as a giant rat. In response, they prepared an enormous amount of food laced with poison, which pleased him greatly. Gilbert fearfully whispered to Victor that he owed him his life. However, Victor simply retorted, with a tinge of anger, that he hoped Gilbert was happy as they had just made Vainqueur stronger. A moment later, he was sleeping on the ground next to the bones of the meat he had devoured. On the other hand, Victor was inside the castle, thinking that when the Marquise invited him in for breakfast, he had expected another poisoned meal. However, it was actually a perfectly normal breakfast. He surmised she just wanted someone to rant to while they ate, even as she brandished a weapon at him. She furiously shouted about the humiliation of having a red dragon empty their pantry, take a nap at her front door, and then question why the gods had sent this calamity. She then asked Victor if he was still there. Gilbert confirmed that he was, adding that the poison should have killed Vainqueur thrice over by now. When Victor inquired about her abundant supply of poison, she explained it was due to post-war politics. Then she asked him about his level. Upon hearing that he was a level 7, she expressed disbelief, stating that a level 7 couldn't possibly tame a dragon. Victor, shocked, asked if he looked like a dragon tamer. He described the dragon as a wrecking ball. Gilbert interjected that Vainqueur, the dragon, listened to Victor and that Victor had saved his life. Victor confessed that all he could do was steer Vainqueur in a particular direction and hope the dragon wouldn't burn down too many houses. She suggested they could mount an attack while the dragon slept. Victor responded by recommending they offer Vainqueur a better perk, or perhaps free levels. A guard, dressed in a suit of armor, moved closer and shouted at Victor to watch his mouth. When asked about his origins, Victor stated that he came from Earth, specifically America, and had been summoned to this world. She then revealed the significance of the Mark of Dice, which she should have recognized. Only someone chosen by the god of luck could befriend a dragon. This news infuriated Victor. He resented the fact that Vainqueur had abducted him and that the world was a hostile place where everything wanted to eat or rob him. He compared it to being stuck in the Middle Ages without the luxury of even taking a bath. He warned them against trying to steal from Vainqueur again. Gilbert then asked her why she wanted the rapier in the first place. She confessed that the rapier was a lost family heirloom, but she was clueless as to how it ended up in Vainqueur Nightbane's possession. Victor inquired about Vainqueur's reputation and learned from her that Vainqueur was the most powerful dragon on the continent. A guard added that some believed Vainqueur had once devoured a level 70 knight, and that while monsters had been roaming the land since the Century War ended, Vainqueur could obliterate a forest full of them in a second. She proposed a plan to Victor. Despite the devastating loss of her pantry, they could potentially use the dragon. If Vainqueur wanted to be an adventurer, they could send him on a doomed quest to kill the demon King Brandon Mature or the farmers in Prydain. Either Vainqueur would succeed, or he would die trying. It was a win-win situation. Victor countered by stating that Vainqueur wouldn't take on any task unless there was a substantial reward. He then asked her if she could afford to pay Vainqueur should he succeed. She assured Victor that she would inform His Majesty and the Shining Knight, who would handle the matter. Victor asked if there were any evildoers in need of a dragonfire reckoning. Gilbert mentioned the Scorcher mercenaries, who had become bandits after the Century War left them jobless. Suddenly, Vainqueur's booming voice startled them. He called Victor back, declaring it was time to collect his shiny treasure. Victor realized he had almost forgotten but hoped that the forest fire had died out by now. Victor asked if she have a large, bag-like portion of fire resistance, her anger flaring at his question. "Haven't you done enough already?" He responded by threatening to reveal to Vainqueur that she had more food hidden beneath the castle. Taken aback, she called him a monster. A moment later, the conversation turned. "What were you doing with that cattling this morning, Victor?" He replied that he had been reprimanding the Marquise for attempting to steal from him, a response that earned Victor a compliment. "Good idea, I'd hate to have her as my next dinner guest." Victor then explained that he had found some decent loot left behind by the monsters he had defeated the previous day. He credited his Eye for Treasure class perk for his ability to identify magical items and determine their value. Victor then listed his new acquisitions: a ring of fire resistance, a horn of wyvern calling, a firebomb necklace, and a pair of solar bracers. The conversation shifted to Victor's new poison resistance perk. didn't you say you could only gain a perk every 2 levels? Victor clarified that this restriction applied only to class perks. Personal perks, such as his poison resistance, could be unlocked by meeting specific, though rare, hidden criteria. Who else but a dragon like me could unlock such a thing? He boasted. He ordered Victor to place the treasures in a bag as they were returning to his hoard and planned to embark on another easy quest. Victor informed him that his survival in the burning forest was due to the Markwise's potion, and inquired about the intended use of the ring and bracers. They are shiny and will look good in my hoard, he responded. Victor suggested he would perform better with the proper equipment, but Vainqueur dismissed the idea. A ring won't improve your appearance. To me, all manlings look the same. Victor thanked him for the backhanded compliment and explained the practical uses of each item: fire resistance from the ring, wyvern summoning from the horn, and increased strength in sunlight from the bracers. Vainqueur interrupted Victor, intrigued by the idea of growing stronger by wearing bracers. Upon learning that the bracers were human-sized and would not fit him, Vainqueur grew frustrated. Why would my perk deliver human-sized treasure? This is sabotage, a malfunction. Nevertheless, he agreed to loan Victor the items out of his boundless generosity, which Victor gratefully acknowledged. The conversation turned again, this time to Victor's eye for treasure perk. Before Victor could fully explain that it required certain levels to obtain, Vainqueur interjected with a question: can I have multiple classes at once? Victor confirmed that he could, up to a total cap of 100. Beyond that, one ascends to godhood or something similar. I will reach level 100, and you will become level 99. Vainqueur declared confidently. He agreed to Victor's suggestion of a new quest, provided it paid well. Victor showed him bounty posters for 3 bandit leaders: Gustave la Muriel, Ogron the Ogre, and Francois Villemain, notorious for countless war crimes. The bounties for 2 of the bandits were 5,000 gold, while the other one was worth 10,000 gold. He also mentioned that Duchess Eleanor of Essekel was offering a reward for their deaths. He asked Victor how much, and Victor replied, 20,000 in total, officially, to which he immediately responded that he will pass. Then he asked Victor what he meant by officially. Victor explained that he was sure the Duchess would offer him a more substantial reward under the table for defeating her enemies. This prompted him to ask why. If the Duchess was willing to offer more, she didn't put it in the request, why under the table, and if it was some kind of magic ritual. Victor explained that it was a way to avoid taxes, and he told him in a hushed tone that the king takes 10% of any reward offered through the Adventurers Guild. He exclaimed that it was theft, and it was no wonder he had become a thief, given that his own race was led by a robber. Then, he asked if this under-the-table ritual could help. Victor responded affirmatively and explained that tax evasion was an ancient, respected human tradition. As he was a dragon, Victor assured him that the Duchess would likely offer him a greater reward than she would offer to humans. He shouted that she better do so and ordered Victor to initiate their pursuit of the thieving king. This declaration made Victor sigh in relief because Vainqueur believed him, giving him hope that he might be able to do some good after all. Night fell on the largest port in the Duchy of Euskal. 3 bandits observed the port. One of them said that all he saw was a breeding ground for weakness. Another man replied that he couldn't have agreed more. Then, he asked the woman if this was the place she wanted them to attack, to which she responded affirmatively. She ordered them to ravage the city, recover her due, and then she would reward them handsomely. She assured them that the Demon King, Brandon Mature, would see to it. The man asked the lady if she didn't mind them having a bit of fun with the place first. She replied that they could, as long as they left no survivors, and instructed them to stay in touch. The armored one addressed the man, calling him Villemain, and asked if there were any formidable defenders. Villemain, addressing the armored man as Gustave, responded that nobody was at level 20. Gustave expressed disappointment, mentioning that he was beginning to grow bored with killing peasants, and then asked which of them would lead the charge. Suddenly, a voice boomed, "Me," making them turn around. They saw a massive creature who announced that Ogron would burn the city, and no one would stand in his way. Meanwhile, in the sky, Victor was questioned by Vainqueur if they had arrived at their destination yet. However, Victor denied this, saying that the ogre, Ogron, had last been seen near Hadamar. This led Vainqueur questioning Victor about how he could differentiate between their dirty villages, when they all appeared similar to him. In response, Victor simply stated that he believed their next stop would be the right one. Upon being asked why he thought so, Victor responded that it was due to the fires. On the other hand, in the land of Villemain, Gustave and Ogron were wreaking havoc on the village. Ogron, in a fit of anger, threatened to eat their children. One of the knights, out of fear, urged his comrade to hold the line. They needed more time to evacuate, but his comrade asked him to look up, because Ogron had brought a dragon. Vainqueur was ready to land, asking Victor for directions. Victor advised him to land near the attackers. The sight of Vainqueur stunned the villagers. When he landed, the ground broke due to the force. The bandits shielded their faces to avoid the sand in their eyes, but the villagers began to flee. Ogron, noticing this, labeled them as cowards and stated that dragons were not scary. He questioned the bandits, asking which one of them was Ogron the ogre. Ogron shouted confidently that he was the one. Despite this proclamation, Vainqueur didn't believe him and repeated his question. Victor then pointed to Ogron, affirming that he was indeed the ogre in question. However, Vainqueur disagreed, calling Ogron a cyclops instead of an ogre because ogres have 2 eyes. This statement left Victor stunned, but he confirmed that the creature was indeed Ogron. Upon hearing this, Ogron clarified that he was the only Ogron around, and that he had shed blood for Garda-Magni. Yet, instead of rewarding him with gold, the king had given him a dirt farm. Vainqueur, still perplexed, asked Victor why Ogron was called an ogre if he was a cyclops. Ogron angrily replied that he was known as Ogron the ogre because he ate people. He then swung his axe at Vainqueur, shouting that he was a warrior, and that Vainqueur would meet his end. But, much to everyone's surprise, Vainqueur simply consumed half of Ogron's body, causing the latter's lower half to collapse to the ground. This left Victor, the villagers, and the remaining bandits in shock. While chewing on Ogron, Vainqueur mused that it was quite a satisfying meal. He informed Victor that Cyclops tasted like salty pigs and he desired more. This made Victor worry about the villagers' safety, prompting him to direct Vainqueur's attention to the bandits. Considering them a potential dessert, Vainqueur grabbed some bandits and happily declared that they tasted like veal. Upon witnessing this, Vilmain panicked and ordered his comrades to retreat, causing Vainqueur to shout in annoyance as they fled. The following morning, Vainqueur burped contentedly, having overeaten. He lay amongst the debris, informing Victor that he had leveled up and asked about the benefits of these increases. The system showed Vainqueur that he had gained a level in the noble and snobbery class, which meant he inflicted more damage to, and received less from, non-noble targets. Victor instructed him to use the command menu to check his stats. Upon being asked if he had not noticed this before, Vainqueur shyly confessed that he had, but was merely testing Victor's knowledge. He then declared menu aloud. The system displayed his stats: level 3, noble 3, a party member of V&V, with health points at 5,315, special points at 1,290, strength at 95, vitality at 88, skill at 11, agility at 39, intelligence at 9, charisma at 71, and luck at 39. Vainqueur interpreted V&V as double Vainqueur. People began to approach him, causing Vainqueur to be taken aback. Although they knew that the dragon had annihilated the bandits, the villagers were still terrified, wondering if they were to be the next victims. He told Victor that the ambience felt too heavy and ordered him to sing his praises to cheer up the gloomy manlings. Victor understood, raised his hand, and shouted, "Vainqueur is the best dragon." Victor then stared at the people. They nodded their heads, indicating their understanding. In response, the crowd joyously shouted that Vainqueur was the best dragon, which made him proud. He thanked everyone, believing he deserved the adulation, and declared himself as Vainqueur, the adventurer. He had come to rescue them and ordered them to bring their cattle. Victor asked the people who was in charge. A man pointed to a girl while explaining that their mayor had been killed, leaving the guild representative as their presumed leader. The girl, Charlene, fearfully denied this, panicking and shouting, "It's Vainqueur again." Before this, in the guild hall, someone had asked her if she was sure she wanted to leave Valbin. "It won't be the same without you," they'd cautioned. But she had insisted, asking the guild to transfer her as far from Vainqueur's lair as possible. They had agreed. The person had said they couldn't blame her and asked where she was going. She had happily replied that she was moving to Hadamar, thinking it would be perfect because there she would find a beautiful beach, a peaceful land, and no dragons. But in the end, she was kneeling on the ground, shouting in disbelief, "Are they kidding me?" A few hours later, near the beach, Victor joyfully informed him that Charlene was the acting mayor and the new guild hall manager. Victor introduced a man named Henry Bright, a scholar who wanted to discuss Vainqueur's career choices. Charlene, in frustration, told him that on behalf of Hadamar, she regretfully granted him the city's highest honor, the keys. However, he interrupted her, asking about his money before she could finish explaining. Victor assured him it was already covered. She angrily told him she had reported his deed to the Duchess, who would send men-at-arms to deliver his reward. Charlene then told Victor that she could hardly believe what she was saying, but they would be offered free lodging for the week at the Guildhall for their exemplary service. When Vainqueur asked her if there was a lava bath, she firmly replied no. He told Victor that he couldn't believe his species was so backward and that he would sleep on the warm sand. However, he doubted his lackey shared his quality standards. Victor confirmed that he would make sure to enjoy a good, warm bed. Henry then addressed him as Great Vainqueur, informing him that his friend Victor said he needed advice on the class system. Vainqueur ordered him to refer to him as His Majesty in italics and asked, "What is a friend? Is it some kind of minion?" Yet, Henry simply asked him how he had the super senses perk. Vainqueur agreed, acknowledging that he did indeed have the perk, and asked Henry how he knew. Charlene explained that Henry was Hodimer's class expert, advising locals on how to develop their classes and stats. Henry interjected, however, expressing his surprise that a dragon could gain classes. It was a whole new discovery. Vainqueur replied that he didn't know either and asked what exactly the system was. Henry replied that the system was of a supernatural nature, unlocked by the god Dice during its inaugural roll. At that time, Dice was still a sentient artifact, and classes symbolized potent roles, granting immense powers to those who could access them. This led him to question Victor, "Are you sure the dragons didn't create this system?" Victor stated that Dice was the first intelligent being to gain a class. In response, Henry noted that even though Dice never claimed to be the system's creator, evidence pointed to it as the first entity to activate the system. He challenged them, asserting that they had no evidence proving dragons hadn't created the system. He hypothesized it was a dragon-crafted system designed to amass wealth and power. Understanding this, he expressed his desire for more levels in the noble class to Henry. However, Henry cautioned him that the noble class was hit or miss, offering very few significant perks, such as a monthly stipend. His eyes sparkled at the mention of free money, prompting him to inquire when he could acquire it. Henry informed him that it would be available at noble level 9. He then asked Henry what else could augment his wealth. Henry suggested merchant or banker roles, which annoyed him. He expressed disdain for the merchant role, dismissing it as work suitable for minions, and pointed out that a dragon does not run a shop. Henry countered by stating that crafter classes often received superior material rewards. He further clarified that classes were categorized into 5 groups: fighters, spellcasters, rogues, crafters, and monsters. Charlene confessed, albeit unwillingly, that Hodimer needed assistance. She elaborated that the Scorcher bandits, under pressure from the royal army, aimed to steal ships and flee the country. She warned that even after Ogrun's death, they might return. His response was enthusiastic, appreciating the opportunity for free experience and the lack of a need to pursue the bandits. He inquired about a class that could enrich him in a dragon-like manner. Henry proposed the Gambler's class, explaining that they possessed intelligence, skill, luck, and several perks conducive to gold farming. Confused, he demanded an explanation for the unfamiliar term. Despite Henry's thorough explanation, he failed to comprehend it, expressing his boredom with a loud shout. He designated Victor as his new class manager, leaving Victor puzzled and questioning his new role. He justified his decision by asserting that, as a dragon, he was too important to concern himself with such details. He then dismissed everyone, telling Victor that he was not paid enough to tolerate such nonsense. Victor countered by saying that things were going well and noted his previous failed interaction with Charlene. He suggested that her presence might present a second chance. Victor's words filled him with joy. He shared his desire to procreate, wishing to place his eggs in a female human. Victor pointed out the inappropriateness of his choice of words. He then advised Victor that he would never succeed without taking a bath. He had been holding back, but now he told Victor frankly that he smelled like dung and would never procreate with that odor. However, as his master, he pledged to endure it and do everything to perpetuate his species. Victor was taken aback, questioning whether he was serious. He affirmed his intentions, stating that this way, he could replenish his stock of minions. Victor, however, vowed not to let any of his future children near him. He then ordered Victor to bathe in the sea for his own good. Victor assured him that he would use the inn's hot baths and thanked him. He made an okay sign, telling Victor to procreate and abstain from sinning any further. Once he was alone, he shouted menu several times to check his profile, exclaiming joyfully that it was addictive. The next day, in the guild hall, Victor was happily washing his body in the room, reflecting on how long it had been since he had taken a warm bath. The recent encounter with the dragon made him believe he'd never be able to relax again. He glanced at his necklace and marveled at how the Guardimagens Guild had promoted them to copper-ranked adventurers. Although he was unsure of what to do with the loot, Vainqueur insisted on keeping everything, even the most insignificant items. Suddenly, Henry barged into his bathroom, shouting his name and causing him to jump in surprise. Hastily covering his body, Victor demanded to know why Henry had entered his room. Henry replied that he had been studying Victor's case and had become so engrossed that he could no longer wait to discuss it. However, mid-conversation, Henry paused, noticing the tattoo on Victor's shoulder. He asked if it was the mark of the Night Blades, Guardamagna's most dangerous criminal syndicate. Victor looked away, giving a non-committal answer, but Henry pressed him about the Thieves' Guild mark on his shoulder. Victor replied that he had been a legitimate repossessor of private goods before leaving the guild to become an adventurer. He knew he was only fooling himself by thinking he had truly left the Night Blades. He glared at Henry, warning him to remain silent about his past. Taken aback, Henry quickly changed the topic, suggesting that Victor's dragon, Vainqueur, would greatly benefit from Crusader's stats growth and perks, making him nigh undefeatable. Victor questioned whether Henry was serious about making Vainqueur even more overpowered. When Henry confirmed he was, he further asked if it was not part of his job. Victor admitted it was but clarified that he did not plan on doing it well. He asked Henry not to refer to Vainqueur as his dragon, as that was making quite an assumption. Despite this, Henry continued to enthuse about the optimization potential. Victor remained skeptical, reminding Henry that Vainqueur only cared about gold and was already strong enough to treat a Cyclops as casually as one would a chicken nugget. Unless a class that could farm gold without requiring strenuous work was proposed, Victor warned that Vainqueur would not be interested. Suddenly, a system notification informed Victor that he had gained a level in Monster Squire. He was surprised to learn that as a minion trainer, his minions would now gain 50% more experience when fighting by his side. He wondered aloud how he had managed to level up in Monster Squire. Henry explained that serving the dragon had earned him the Monster Squire class, so naturally, he would gain experience when working on behalf of Vainqueur. Victor understood that this only confirmed his earlier thoughts. However, he questioned whether the class expected him to befriend more dragons. He informed Henry that Vainqueur would continue to gain levels in the noble class until he achieved the stipend perk. After that, he would need a new class better suited for money making. Henry suggested the Gladiator Fighter class, explaining that its perks could provide rewards if the user managed to impress crowds. Given dragons' high strength and charisma, they could make full use of this class. He pondered whether he should actually share this with Vainqueur, given that Vainqueur is a self-centered jerk. However, considering Vainqueur saved the city, he concluded to label it as damage control and consult Henry for the class document. Henry responded affirmatively, indicating that he had some suggestions for him as well. He inquired whether he possessed the claimed by dice perk, as it would imply a 10% greater chance to boost his intelligence and luck with each level, making him a capable spellcaster. Shyly, he asked Henry a somewhat childish question about whether a class could improve his dating life. He added that he was asking on behalf of a friend. Henry replied positively and asked about his friend's charisma. The response was as much as his, causing Henry to label it as average, which hurt his feelings. Nevertheless, Henry suggested the Fiendish Rake class, discovered by Ludwig van. It had demanding entry conditions, including charisma, vitality, and agility scores of 50 each in completing a specific demonic ritual. Hearing this, he dismissed the idea. Subsequently, he covered his body and asked Henry if he had any reservations, to which Henry, noticing his shyness, affirmed. Before leaving, Henry reassured Victor not to worry, as he would find the perfect class progression for his friend. This caused Victor to question if everyone on the planet was obsessed with class progression. Suddenly, a system notification appeared, revealing he had received the Observer personal perk, which allowed him to instantaneously determine the class levels of anyone he looked at, as long as they were on the same total level as him or lower. If the target was of a higher level, he could only discern their total class level. He reckoned this new perk would be useful. Relaxing in the bath, he was glad to be finally alone, without a dragon to manage, if only for a few hours. Suddenly, someone called his name, surprising and irritating him. When he looked towards the door, he was shocked to see Charlene, who angrily asked if she was intruding on his day off. All he could do was question why she was there. She reminded him that she managed the place, which was Hothammer's Guildhall and served as the main inn. He conceded but questioned if he hadn't kept the room for a while, designating it as his safe space. Charlene retorted that his privacy was solely due to no one daring to argue with a 60-foot-long dragon outside, and mentioned the destruction of her previous guild hall. Victor countered by arguing that if he hadn't interceded, Vainqueur would have devastated all of Valbane. Charlene shot back, saying that Vainqueur had only awakened because he had tried to steal something. Angered, he reminded her that if he hadn't taken that quest, someone else would have, possibly resulting in an even worse outcome. Despite all of Vainqueur's faults, he had saved the city from bandits, unless she believed the guards could have defeated Ogron the Ogre on their own. Charlene tried to reason with him, but he emphatically asserted that he had done his best given his circumstances, asking what she would have done in his place, leaving her speechless. In the end, she admitted that she couldn't blame him for doing his best when confronted with a giant dragon, acknowledging that the situation had been stressful for her too. Victor replied that now she understood, but Charlene still insisted it was no excuse to laze about all day. She threw him a towel, instructing him to dress and prepare for a task. Grinning, he asked if she had any plans for the evening. She said she had work, to which he suggested he'd be available once the job was completed. She remained silent, causing him to sweat in panic. She then instructed him to go to the basement to exterminate rats, causing him to protest that it was a form of adventurer hazing. but she insisted. Later, he descended into the basement, torch in hand, ruminating on the lengths he was willing to go for love. He searched the basement but found no signs of rats, causing him to question whether she had sent him on a futile mission. Suddenly, he heard someone instructing another to remember that everything is in the heart and to practice the pose with feeling. He spotted 5 creatures nearby and wondered if they were kobolds. One of the creatures saw him and panicked, declaring there was a human present. Another suggested it was time for their choreography and urged the others to execute it with heart so that the human would cower before them. They began by shouting, "We fight for injustice, we live for mayhem, we strike at night, and we thrive in discord. We are the Kobold Rangers." This left him stunned and confused. The kobolds cheered, boasting that they had mastered their choreography and had taken him aback. They pondered whether they should incorporate the word chaos into their motto for added impact and suggested Doom to amplify their message, leaving him as though he were invisible. He noted that Blue's timing seemed off and suggested that, for full effect, they needed a team pet like a white alligator. This remark irritated Blue, who questioned how he dared criticize his performance when mammals could not comprehend true art. He replied that it was simply too modern for his taste. The blue kobold accused him of being an ignorant mammal, proclaiming that the pineapple of wisdom had enlightened them. The black kobold added that he was out of touch and it was time for action. He sighed in frustration, prompting the black kobold to express his desire to attack. However, the red kobold reassured his comrades, insisting that the human understood. He agreed, explaining that he understood them just fine and his monster kin perk was indeed effective. When the kobolds caught a whiff of him, they detected a scent similar to a dragon, which left him surprised since he had just bathed. Despite this, he considered it could be advantageous and announced to the kobolds that he was Victor, Dragon's chief of staff for Vainqueur, and they should yield or risk being devoured. The kobolds were incredulous about his position as chief of staff, but they felt an intense charisma from him. They concluded they had no other option but to negotiate peace. He demanded their greatest treasure in return for their lives, and the red kobold urged his comrades to quickly retreat into the tunnel. Victor began to feel remorseful, as they seemed as naive as children. They then produced a tablet adorned with a pineapple symbol. He inquired about its nature and whether it was indeed a tablet. The blue kobold confirmed it was the pineapple of wisdom, and the red one added that it contained the universe's darkest secrets. He then realized why the tablet had corrupted them. It wasn't unheard of for items from Earth to end up in Outremont. Still, he wondered what was locked behind the files, assuming he would need passwords to access them. The blue kobold exclaimed that he could harness the power of the pineapple. The kobolds prostrated themselves and pleaded for him to accept them, leaving him astonished. He inquired about where he should take them. The red kobold implored him to allow them to serve his dragon master, acknowledging their lack of professional experience but insisting on their dedication and eagerness to learn. He asked them if they realized Vainqueur might consume them. They excitedly responded that for a kobold, there was no greater honor than to be devoured by dragons, and they considered it their duty to serve such majestic creatures. He accepted them as unpaid interns, mentioning it was a stepping stone for their future career advancement. The pink kobold recognized the weight of their new responsibility, and the red one promised not to disappoint their dragon master chief. He pondered that the more he became a lackey, the stronger he grew and wondered how that was even fair. Looking at his system, he saw he had gained 2 levels in Monster Squire and Monster Student, enabling him to learn monster-exclusive perks once taught or targeted by them. Moreover, he counted as a monster for class access criteria. Just then, Vainqueur called him. He told the kobolds that it was time for their first day on the job. Charlene arrived in the basement begging him to handle the dragon situation before Vainqueur destroyed the village. On noticing the kobolds, she questioned their species. He confirmed they were kobolds, not rats, explaining why mousetraps had failed. Later, they emerged from the guild hall to meet Vainqueur. On seeing him, Victor realized that while he couldn't breed, he had decided to adopt. The kobolds were thrilled at the sight of a real dragon and marveled at Vainqueur's size. They bowed and pleaded for Vainqueur to accept them among his retinue. Vainqueur assured them of his acceptance and pledged to defend their right to serve him. Victor commented that Vainqueur was far ahead of his time. Vainqueur urged haste, having detected ruffians in the city, and questioned whether he would be rewarded for dispatching them. Victor informed him that he could receive up to 100 coins per bandit's head and thousands for leaders. As they began their journey, Victor reminded him of their purpose, to increase the size of his horde. Meanwhile, Henry was walking to someone's house, then he called Miss Laver to tell her that he was there, and someone opened the door. Laver sweetly told him that it was kind of him to visit her and that when he informed her he was visiting their beloved Hodemmer, she couldn't pass up the opportunity. Henry bowed his head while telling her that it was an honor to meet her in person, Then he panicked to pick up his things that had fallen, making Laver laugh while telling him to call her Lucy. She added that while she may represent the Royal University, she never forgot her humble roots. Henry asked Lucy Laver, a scholar of level 15 with spellcaster classes, why she hid most of her classes. She replied that he knew how academic rivalries could get and that she was one of Archmage Nostradame's apprentices. Consequently, many coveted her position and would do anything to take it. She also explained to him that in particular, she studied new fields of spellcasting not yet recognized by the university. She might get in trouble if they were discovered before she published her thesis. She then invited him in, telling him that they could discuss it further inside. Henry went inside and was amazed. The place seemed bigger on the inside than the outside. He asked her if she was using a space alteration spell. She replied that it was the doing of the true owner. She must say that she was one of her mentors, which made Henry comment that her mentor must be a powerful mage. Lucy agreed, stating that she was indeed powerful and that she learned from the best. Henry asked her what a mage of their caliber was doing in their fair city. She replied that her teacher wanted her to keep an eye on a secret project in Hodemar and asked him to keep quiet about her presence there. To this, Henry agreed and assured her that he hadn't told anyone about his visit. He then handed her a scroll, telling her that he thought she would be interested in his discovery. She opened it and saw something about a Monster Squire class. She told Henry that she had never heard of such a class. Henry explained to her that it was a whole new monster class, and Vainqueur, the dragon, had gained levels in it. He also informed her that Vainqueur was not the first case of an intelligent monster gaining levels, but was certainly the first dragon to do so. He wished he could study him further, but Guild Officer Charlene had warned him that the Duchess would soon send knights after Vainqueur. She returned the scroll to him, saying that she would not count on knights to deal with Vainqueur when his name was Knightsbane after all, but they could discuss it in her study because she believed his class research had great potential. He entered the room, telling her that hearing her say it warmed his heart. She told him that she was certain those gentlemen would agree, making Henry ask who these gentlemen were. Suddenly, someone appeared behind him, stunning him. Then Gustave Lemuriel, level 25, Knight 20, and Heavy Knight 4, looked at him, making him realize that Gustave must be Lucy's friend. However, when he looked in front of him, he was gripped by fear when he saw humans hanging on the post, and a man introducing himself as Francois Villemain, a Scorcher captain, alongside his comrade Gustave. Villemain was level 27, a fallen Bishop of Death Jester 13, Outer Lar 3, and Fencer 7. Then, Villemain told him that he was certain he had heard a myriad of horrible tales about them and all of them were indeed true. Henry took a seat, fear etched on his face, and inquired what they had done with Miss Laver, and whether she was their hostage. However, Villemain assured him that it was far from the truth as their mistress was Laver herself. She had agreed to let them hide at her place in exchange for assisting her students or, as one might call it, aiding her empirical research. Henry warned Villemain that his disappearance would raise suspicion if they were to kill him. Yet, Villemain wryly commented that whether or not people noticed, Henry would still be dead. However, he reassured Henry that they weren't savages and suggested they should have a chat first. Contrary to what Henry might think, they, the Scorchers, did not start out as bandits. They bravely fought for Gardamage during the Century War. Regrettably, with the end of the war, their once respectable occupation of slaughtering people and burning their villages was no longer politically acceptable. He asked Henry, almost incredulously, if he could believe that they were asked to resort to farming like peasants. But luckily for them, Bradon Mora, his dark majesty from Ishaphania, offered an alternative. Bradon promised them a comfortable retirement sum and asylum, provided they torched the countryside of Gardamagny and retrieved an artifact on his behalf. Unfortunately for Henry, Hodemar was part of their target. It was nothing personal. However, they encountered a massive problem. Henry questioned if it was Vainqueur Knightsbane. Villemain confirmed his suspicion. It was indeed the giant dragon that consumed their men for breakfast. Not only had Vainqueur defeated Ogron, but the royal army was also hot on their trail. Thus, their financial future appeared bleak. Gustave revealed to Henry that their interrogation of two men provided information that the dragon had a master. Villemain confessed that they had to use some force until the men disclosed the name, Victor. Gustave noted to Villemain that it wasn't entirely accurate, as one of the two spilled the beans when he saw his companion being zombified. Villemain concurred but reminded Gustave that his outlaw soldier had stabbed him afterward. Gustave clarified it was merely a strategy to help him level up. Villemain felt lucky for a moment. He gained a level from a simple peasant. He nostalgically mentioned missing the good old days when he used to gain experience from killing helpless villagers. Then, Villemain beckoned Henry, addressing him as a friend, assuring him that they could reach a mutually agreed resolution. However, Henry believed they intended to kill him regardless, questioning why he should share any information. Vilmain admitted that they were, indeed, planning to kill him, but he wondered if they needed to use force first. Unlike his comrade, he despised violence and emphasized that he wasn't a savage. Gustave unsheathed his sword and says that the priest of death jester, he was the holiest man present, a worshipper of the god of crime, and he enjoyed his role. This irritated Gustave, who impatiently yelled that he was fed up. He threatened Henry, asking if he would finally talk, or should he remove one of his legs first. Vilmain interjected, assuring Henry that while his death was certain, they could respect a last request if he told them the whole truth. Henry, shaking with fear, asked if they would spare someone if he spoke. Vilmain replied it would depend, but regretfully added that Victor was certainly going to die. Henry then inquired about his house, the repository of all his research. Vilmain asked him if he was ready to betray his friend to save his life's work, expressing respect for such a decision. If a man truly is a man, he argued, he must leave a legacy behind. Vilmain agreed to spare Henry's house and his research. Later, Henry finished sharing all he knew. Vilmain asked him if Victor truly was a Nightblade agent, as it seemed peculiar. Henry clarified that Victor had claimed to have left the group. Vilmain informed Henry that one never truly leaves the Nightblades. He then inquired whether Victor had a weakness and if he was as greedy as the dragon. Henry, visibly nervous, responded that Victor undertakes jobs for Charlene when she requests them. Vilmain acknowledged this useful information and asked Gustave if there was any conceivable way they could best the dragon in combat. Gustave pondered Vainqueur's formidable presence and admitted that he didn't think so either. Nonetheless, Gustave assured Vilmain that Vainqueur wasn't the brightest. Vilmain activated his power and stated their plan. They would distract Vainqueur, raise the town, retrieve the artifact, and then flee on stolen ships. Gustave asked about Vainqueur's human partner, to which Vilmain replied they could handle him given they were both twice his level. Vilmain then addressed Henry, stating that while he might not be brave, he believed him to be truthful. He then revealed that Gustave had 3 levels in Turncoat, a class whose initial perk, Falseness, conceals Turncoat levels from detection perks like Henry's. The second perk is named Trader's Joy. Gustave told Henry that as a class scholar, he must already know what this perk does. Henry confirmed that it allowed the user to gain experience whenever they broke a promise. Vilmain reminded Henry of Gustave's savagery, guessing his house would likely burn like the rest. Gustave, readying his sword to kill Henry, told Vilmain that he'd merely relayed his own sentiments. But before Gustave's blade could sever Henry's head, Vilmain called out for him to stop and wait. Gustave questioned Vilmain, arguing that Henry was of no further use to them. However, Vilmain retorted that he could think of one more use for Henry. Meanwhile, the eyes of the dead men hanging on the posts rose as Vilmain claimed Henry had just one use left. Henry cried out in pain as a powerful green light emanated from inside the room. Elsewhere, Lucy asked her mistress if it was wise to leave those 2 in charge and offered to retrieve the artifact herself. The lady responded that there was no need, they were expendable, unlike her. Given Lucy's history with dragons, she didn't consider her to be reliable. Lucy was taken aback and informed her mistress that she believed she had atoned for her past mistake. The lady corrected her, saying that she had assumed wrongly. She then expressed her concerns about Nightsbane's return and its potential impact on her operations. She ordered Lucy to keep her informed of Vainqueur's movements but not to intervene unless expressly instructed to do so. Furthermore, she urged Lucy not to disappoint her. Lucy acquiesced, saying as you wish, before her mistress disappeared, leaving Lucy to reflect on how her job seemed to be getting harder each day. His name is Vainqueur Nightsbane. Like all great worms, he was mindful of preserving wildlife, and he was careful to maintain the population of princesses, allowing them to grow into queens and produce more princesses. However, there was one species he intended to hunt to extinction. The yellow bandits alerted him to their presence. The yellow kobold pointed at the bandit, reinforcing Vainqueur's belief that bandits were the weeds of the animal kingdom. He swung his axe, aiming to decapitate the bandit, but the bandit dodged his attack. Vainqueur lacked respect for the environment, as it did not reciprocate his regard. He glanced at the kobold pursuing the fleeing bandit before calling out to Victor. Engaged in combat with the bandit himself, Victor acknowledged Vainqueur's call. Vainqueur complained that his axe was not functioning properly. However, Victor suggested that he only needed to swing it down once the bandit was immobilized, reminding him to kill with style to impress his fans and unlock the gladiator class. Vainqueur referred to the bandit as a mammal and inquired if he was familiar with the dragon equivalent of Pain. With a furious heave, he lifted his axe to strike the bandit, declaring Pain to be a birth defect. He succeeded in eliminating the bandit using his axe and raised it triumphantly while the kobolds cheered. Victor asked him if it was true that dragons perceive pain as a birth defect. The system indicated that Vainqueur had advanced a level in both the gladiator and Arena Warrior classes, granting him an immediate medium proficiency and 1.5 times damage boost with all melee weapons. He responded that only mammals experience pain and questioned Vainqueur on whether he needed to wield the axe to acquire new gladiator levels, as he found it impractical. Vainqueur assured him that it was not necessary, explaining that he simply needed to demonstrate his combat prowess while continuously swinging the axe. Suddenly, Vainqueur split a nearby tree in half. The falling trunk struck his head, disorienting him and stunning his minions. He tossed the axe aside in frustration, condemning the human-made axes and venting about his lack of financial gain despite his successful fights. Vainqueur pointed out that the old money system was not designed to work with humans, likely to discourage nobles from exploiting their peasants. Vainqueur examined the few coins and knives they'd collected, considering the loot minimal but better than nothing. However, Vainqueur declared that it was insufficient for his horde and called for the next challenge. The yellow kobold informed him that he'd exterminated all the enemies in the area, leading Vainqueur to question whether there would be no further opportunities for leveling up or gold acquisition that day. Vainqueur suggested they could sell their spoils and even reinvest the earnings for better equipment. Confused, Vainqueur asked Vainqueur to explain the concept of investing. Vainqueur defined investing as exchanging gold for something of higher value, which shocked Vainqueur. The thought of parting with his gold horrified him. Vainqueur attempted to alleviate his concerns, explaining that the gold was being traded for something of greater worth. Visibly distressed at the thought of relinquishing his gold, Vainqueur questioned Vainqueur's health, suggesting his lack of breeding had harmful effects on his cognitive abilities. Vainqueur asked Vainqueur what sane mind would part with gold. Realizing his explanation might be too complex, Vainqueur conceded it might be a difficult concept to grasp. Vainqueur admitted to understanding the value of the bandits' belongings, only to be interrupted by Vainqueur, who reminded him of his role as Vainqueur's treasurer and horde manager. Vainqueur vehemently disagreed, forbidding Vainqueur from touching his horde. He reminded Vainqueur sternly that selling was a task for minions, which included him and the kobolds. Vainqueur decided that they would discard anything not shiny enough for his horde, excluding gold and jewels. To motivate Vainqueur, Vainqueur promised to allow him to retain 1/10 of the profits, a revelation that moved the kobolds to tears as they inquired about their potential payment. Vainqueur informed him that he found it hard to believe he was more generous than the king himself. He declared with pride, stating that he swears to him that V&V shall never pay taxes to the extortionist. He then sternly instructed Vainqueur not to give away any money, not to invest, and that the glorious name of V&V cannot be associated with such insanity. Moreover, he informed him that they would sell the corpses because he was tired of eating humans all the time. This left him perplexed and he inquired about the cause of death of these corpses. He then simply asked Vainqueur if his kind doesn't hunt monsters, collect their corpses, and sell their parts. Vainqueur acknowledged this but clarified that they only sell the monster parts. He asked Vainqueur what they do with the humans, to which Vainqueur replied that he didn't know and that they just leave them behind for animals to consume. Now that he had given it some thought, Vainqueur conceded that it wasn't very sanitary. He informed Vainqueur that he didn't want to give away anything anymore and instructed him to find a way to profit from his surplus of snacks. Vainqueur questioned him, asking if he wanted him to open a shop where he could sell junk and corpses, and inquired if there was anything else. He told Vainqueur that it was a lot of work, but since he was his chief of staff, he would find time between preparing his class progression and training the kobolds. Vainqueur questioned him, asking if he wanted him to teach classes to the kobolds. He reminded Vainqueur that he failed to grasp his grand vision for V&V, which was an adventuring party of minions, trained from the egg and working till death to fulfill a quest. He also informed Vainqueur that shopkeepers sold junk and meat in every one of their backward villages, filling chests with gold, and that everyone worked together to build the greatest treasure that will ever be his horde. His eyes glinted with the luster of gold coins, which left Vainqueur speechless. Later, in the village, on the street, a man called out to everyone, inviting them to check out the best options at Runewell Company. Suddenly, Vainqueur landed near the man, causing the people to freeze mid-motion. Then, the man yelled in fear that the dragon had returned. Vainqueur questioned the man if they were looking to sell stuff and a few lying corpses, but the man declined. Vainqueur asked him why, and the man replied that he was unsure if he would get a fair price. However, Vainqueur confidently told the man that those boots were priceless and were the most expensive boots in the world. The man fearfully examined the boots and agreed. Then, Vainqueur asked him if he knew of anyone who would be interested in buying their loot. The man replied that the priests of Shesha, the goddess of commerce, might be willing to negotiate with the likes of them. Furthermore, the temple also deals with corpses. Vainqueur expressed his disbelief that the man wouldn't buy their stuff and he felt like an outcast. He informed Vainqueur that they were too affluent for them, but at least he would have a talk with their gods and hopefully, they would see reason and grant him a perk at every level. Then Vainqueur told him that he had an ability that let him learn monsters' abilities and thought that if they taught him or if he survived their attacks, he might possess a useful one. He asked Vainqueur if he would breathe fire too if he were incinerated, and if that was what he wanted. Vainqueur told him, on second thought, that he may have been too hasty and asked him to forget he had said anything. However, he told Vainqueur that only if he became a powerful chief of staff on his own would he continue to work hard for his personal gain. Then he asked Vainqueur about the sweet pink and blue kobolds. Vainqueur replied that he had sent them to the local blacksmith because he thought the Scorchers were torching the countryside in search of something in Hot-Emmer, and he wanted to be prepared. He asked what that something was and if it was a treasure. Vainqueur replied that he didn't know, that it may have no strategic value, and uttered brat on more and more, making him think it was interesting without understanding the words. Vainqueur asked him if he was really listening, but the red kobold just shyly told that Vainqueur had figured out the Scorchers' plan, and that their chief of staff was so smart that they wouldn't fail him. The black kobold shyly stated that one day, he too would be chief of staff. However, the yellow kobold shouted that he was first. He told the kobolds not to argue anymore before the chief of staff and to remember the protocol. Vainqueur asked him what protocol, and he replied that it was the minion protocol. Then he explained that the chief of staff was the highest echelon of the minion food chain, second only to their monster lord, and that it required 50% strength, 50% cunning, and 200% loyalty. Vainqueur shyly told him that he was now exaggerating. But the kobolds admired him and told him that he underestimated his importance in the food chain. He told Vainqueur that he was only beneath him in the preciousness hierarchy and was even above princesses. Then he explained that each member of the chain could eat those below them, and if he and Vainqueur were starving, they could consume minions as emergency rations, making the kobolds shout that it would be an honor to feed him. Vainqueur asked him if that meant he considered him a potential meal. He replied that it wouldn't happen unless they had no food or minions available. He reassured Vainqueur that it would never occur because the world was full of dragon food. But just in case, he told Vainqueur to start recruiting, to which Vainqueur agreed as it was better to be safe than sorry. A moment later, in the blacksmith store, Vainqueur asked the kobolds if they had finished and if it had gone well. The blue kobolds told Vainqueur that the manling smith didn't understand their language at first and was mean, but he became friendly when they showed him a drawing of their majesty, Vainqueur. Then they handed Vainqueur a scroll, telling him that they had given Smith his letter and Smith had given them this one in return. Vainqueur read it and told them that Smith was going to make the magical ring he had requested for free and praised them for a job well done, which thrilled the kobolds. Vainqueur thought Smith was a wise manling and that he should be spared. He then shouted orders at his minions, which hyped up the kobolds, even though they didn't know what it was about. Then he ordered them to gather the corpses of his previous victims and reminded them that no coin was too small to make, as he always said. Later, he told Vainqueur that if he understood correctly, his kind worshipped those so-called gods like minions worship their dragon master. Vainqueur replied that it was sort of true, and asked him back if dragons didn't worship, even to secure a good afterlife. He told Vainqueur that such an idea appeals only to creatures fragile enough to die. They honor the elder worm, mother of their race, but as a parent, not a master. The man asked Vainqueur if he had a moment to discuss the prophet Orknoob, and if he wanted salvation in a new world. Vainqueur replied no and told the man to get lost. However, the man held his hand and told him that he could feel his ice-sky level was medium. Vainqueur told the man that he was claimed and tried to reason out. But the man told him that if he signed up to the esoteric order of the New World, he was guaranteed to be reincarnated on the mythical island of Japan where every girl is a waifu. He angrily pulled his hand back while telling the man to get off him. He didn't even have North and South America right on their map. Vainqueur ordered the kobolds to defend his chief of staff from that rabble. Then the kobolds pinned the man down on the ground, making the man shout for help. He asked Vainqueur what it was, and Vainqueur replied that it was a money scam. He had lived on Earth, and it was nothing like he just said. That made him say it was good, meaning it was an extra body to sell. Vainqueur was shocked to hear this and asked him if he could spare the man. The man was just a nuisance. He knew that the guy might be annoying, but he didn't deserve to die either. Vainqueur told him that getting rid of nuisances was more than a pleasure, it was a duty. But he had been a good minion, so he would indulge him because his generosity knew no limits. A moment later, they arrived at the place. Vainqueur tried to go inside using the door, but he didn't fit, causing the wall to break. He angrily ordered Vainqueur to tell the architects to build a bigger door. Vainqueur fearfully replied, sure, and asked him if he could avoid causing the place to fall on them, the poor mortals. But he just asked him, why does your species have to be so small? Then Vainqueur told him to allow him to present him with the gods of Outramond. But he just laughed and told Vainqueur that they weren't so mighty if they had to share the same lair. Vainqueur replied that obviously, they were but a shadow of his majesty's glory. He introduced Mithras, the god of the sun, order, medicine, and justice, then Leon, goddess of glory, nobility, strength, and art. Then Isengrim, the god of the hunt and animals. Then Cybele, the goddess of plants, knowledge, and pleasure. Then Seng, the goddess of water, travel, dreams, and alcohol. Then Moonman, the god of chaos, madness, and the moon. They also have Camilla, the goddess of plagues, vermin, darkness, and death. Then Death Jester, the god of crime, air, and illusions. Then Varen, the goddess of fire, war, tyranny, and machines. Then Shesha, the goddess of commerce, language, and snakes. Then Sabler, the destroyer, and finally Dice, the random number god. Victor fiercely looked at the dice, making him notice it, and told him that he did not like that dice god. Victor replied that the dice god, Dimwit, had summoned him to Outramond without asking, and since it unlocked the system first, everyone worshipped it. It's almost as popular as Mithras. But Vainqueur just laughed and told him, as if the dragon didn't make that system first. He asked, why is that one so savaged, and is that god poor? Victor replied that Sabler supports Ishvania, Gardamagna's rival country, and people pray against Sabler there. He asked Victor how much Sabler was worth because he could hunt him down for the right price. Victor replied that he didn't think picking a fight with a god was a good idea, even for him. But he just asked why. He added that he eats his wormy kind whenever they enter his cave. Victor agreed but told him that the Sabler worm is level 100 and turned the southern continent into a desert. Also, nobody puts a bounty on a god's head. This made him say that it was saddening. A lady greets them and asks if they have come to make an offering. He asks Victor what an offering is, and Victor replies to him that he gives money to the church as an offer to the gods, in place of fealty. He looks at Victor, determined, but Victor tells him that he can't be a god, not unless he reaches level 100 first. Then Victor tells the lady that they have bandit corpses outside and asks if the Church of Mithras will take them. The lady replies that they can burn the corpses so they don't rise as spontaneous undead, and it is free of charge. Then another lady tells him that otherwise, Cybel's priesthood can bury them in the forest, so they can return to nature. Vainqueur asks them why it is free and if they will not pay him for the transportation service, but the lady asks him back why they would pay for a public service. He tells them that they suffered significant expenses in the course of their deadification. Victor tells him that it isn't a real word, but he says that it is because he said it. The lady tells him that they do not pay people to gather corpses, and if they want to be paid instead of doing good, they should go to Shesha. He asks where, and the lady points to the god, but then Victor notices Charlene there praying. He walks closer to her and asks her what she is doing there. She replies that she was praying earlier because Vainqueur almost caused the temple to collapse. He asks her why she was praying to Shesha because he didn't expect her to worship the goddess of commerce, but she explains that it is more of a business deal because, unlike the other gods, Lady Shesha trades her miracles according to the market's rules. He thinks that at least they are honest and asks her how much it would cost to be transported back to his homeworld. The lady tells him to let her ask the goddess, and she will provide a price. Then Shesha shows 2 billion, making him shocked, and he thinks that it is armed robbery. The lady explains to him that he gets a 20% reduction if he takes the premium worshipper annual subscription, and 30% if he becomes a priest. Vainqueur tells the lady that his minion has no intention of leaving his current, fulfilling job, to which Victor agrees and tells the lady that they are there to sell their loot and 8 bandit corpses. He asks him why only 8, and Victor reminds him that he ate the others, to which he agrees. The lady tells them that they can buy the corpses to make fertilizer and she would give 1 gold piece per corpse. Vainqueur says he wants double, but the lady sticks to 1. He increases to triple, making Victor tell him that he was supposed to go lower in a negotiation. Vainqueur tells them that it is only if they lack confidence, but he is a dragon so he knows his net worth. The lady firmly tells him that, dragon or not, the market absolutely sticks to 1. Suddenly, someone excuses himself and tells them that he heard their argument. Then asks if they are looking to sell fresh corpses because the Church of Camilla would be happy to oblige. He asks Victor who Camilla is, and Victor replies that she was one of the Dread Three. He also explains that Varen, Camilla, and Death Jester were a trio of evil adventurers before ascending to godhood, and like Sabler, people are too scared of them to ban their worship. The man tells them that he resents the evil label and explains that their goddess is simply misunderstood. Victor asks the man if Camilla didn't unleash the Red Death Plague that turned people into vampires. The man replies that it was only to prevent overpopulation, and the vampires played a critical role in winning the Century War. He then asks if they have heard of the Undethrial Revolution, making the Shesha representative say here we go again. Charlene tells the man that she has and that necromancers buy corpses, turn them into mindless zombies, then put them to work. The man explains that it is a promising young industry, albeit scorned by the masses. The man also tells them that in time, people will see the benefits of enslaving the dead and tells them to imagine zombies laboring the fields or fearless skeletons saving helpless orphans from forest fires. Victor questioned him, asking if he desired service from decaying corpses. He responded, explaining that undead minions are seen as a status symbol amongst dragons. They don't flee, aren't tempted by wealth, and almost match the longevity of dragons. The man suggested to Victor, considering his status, that he could potentially become a necromancer and enter the market himself. He asked Victor if he was capable of raising the dead. Victor confirmed his abilities, but voiced his discomfort with them. Vainqueur advised Victor to change his perspective for his own benefit. A woman interjected, mentioning their goddess, Shesha, and her reservations about the long-term consequences of mass necromancy. The man vehemently defended undead labor, disregarding the opinions of those attempting to suppress undead enterprises due to unproven negative environmental effects. Vainqueur, addressing the man as corpseling, inquired about the cost per body. The man offered 50 gold coins per corpse if a binding contract was signed to allow them to turn the bodies into undead. The agreement was made immediately. Afterwards, outside, the man complimented the quality of the corpses and expressed his satisfaction with the transaction. Victor confessed his unease at selling corpses for post-mortem labor to a necromancer. Vainqueur asked Victor why he felt this way when there's great joy in seeing one's wealth increase. He then instructed the man to give his chief of staff his fee of 4 coins. Victor questioned why he received only 4 coins when he thought he was supposed to receive a tenth of the sales, which should be 40. Vainqueur claimed Victor's calculations were incorrect, reminding him he had said 1/10, which Victor interpreted as a tenth of a tenth. Vainqueur confirmed and asked Victor if he wanted less. Victor declined, stating the offer was already too generous. The man thanked them for supporting their country's modernization and asked for a blood signature on the bottom of the page. Upon providing his signature, Victor received a notification that he had gained the dead friend's personal perk, making mindless undead neutral to him unless provoked, and increasing his charisma when interacting with the undead or Camilla worshippers by 5 points. Vainqueur mentioned his new perk and asked Victor if he had gained one as well. Victor admitted that he had, expressing his deep shame for the perk. As he was examining the perk, a woman named Charlene tapped his shoulder, requesting a moment to discuss a favor. He consented, asking her to explain the problem. She handed him a note, explaining that Henry was missing. His house had been ransacked and the note was left behind. Victor read it. It was from Scorcher Francois Villemain, proposing a negotiation for Henry's release, along with a ransom in gold, in exchange for mercy from King Vainqueur Knightsbane. Victor noticed coordinates for a meeting point included in the letter. Charlene admitted she had hoped Shesha could help locate Henry, but the cost was too steep, even for the guild. Victor asked why she had made a gold offering to Shesha if she couldn't afford her services. She clarified it was a private donation. Vainqueur voiced his indifference to the idea of being bribed for forgiveness, but Victor noted that the meeting point was far from Hodemmer and likely a trap. Vainqueur retorted, questioning if they are facing him, and tells what can they do. Victor agreed, suspecting a potential city raid in their absence. Charlene reprimanded Victor for his insensitive speculations about Henry's fate. Victor, flustered, insisted he didn't mean to cause upset, and was merely suggesting a worst-case scenario. He sought assurance from Vainqueur that they would rescue Henry from the Scorchers. Vainqueur confirmed their intention to save Henry, reasoning that the bounties won't claim themselves. Later, one of the kobolds happily told Victor that the blacksmith had sent them the gift he asked for. They then walked closer to him while dragging a large object. He replied that it was perfect, and he was just taking stock of their other magical items. They had a firebomb necklace that allowed him to cast the spell Fireball a limited number of times, and the solar bracers increased his strength stat under the sun. There was also a ring of fire resistance, which halved fire damage, and the horn of wyvern calling. Victor used the horn, thinking it was time to get his own mini dragon. A small red dragon emerged, surprising him. Excited, he asked it if he could ride on its back. Suddenly, Vainqueur arrived and accused him of betrayal, freezing Victor and the kobolds in fear. Vainqueur furiously told him that he had turned his back on him for just 5 minutes, and he had cheated on him with a wyvern right after he had given him custody of their first minions. Panicking and fearful, Victor tried to explain to Vainqueur that he was just testing the horn. One of the kobolds begged them to stop fighting, but Vainqueur angrily interrupted, asking if it was because she would let him ride on her back. Victor admitted that the thought had crossed his mind. Vainqueur told him that he knew his species had a shameful fixation on dragon riding, but he could never allow that. What mattered was that he was a dirty, shameless master chaser. He pointed to the necklace as proof, but Victor corrected him, saying it was not a necklace but a ring for him. Vainqueur was taken aback and asked Victor if it was truly for him. Victor confirmed that it was a dragon-sized ring of invisibility, and explained that he just needed to say blink while wearing it to become invisible. Feeling regretful, Vainqueur asked why he had made him doubt him, admitting he could have eaten him. From the kobold's point of view, it was a touching scene. Victor then placed the ring on Vainqueur's finger, and a system notification informed him that by strengthening his bond with his vassal, he had gained 2 levels in Noble and Noblesse Oblige. This meant he gained a temporary boost of +5 to all his statistics when defending his vassals from their enemies. Upon saying the word blink, Vainqueur became invisible, causing him to panic. He told Victor he couldn't see himself. Victor confirmed that he had indeed become invisible. One of the kobolds tapped Victor's shoulder to tell him something was wrong. Victor looked around and saw violet smoke surrounding them. He wondered what it was, considering it might be an evening fog. But knowing it was the middle of the day, he suspected it was a spell. Suddenly, one of the kobolds told him that the town was under attack by the Scorcher. The rangers were ready to strike, and he agreed that they should go. Vainqueur, flying high in the sky, ordered them to move forward. However, he was disoriented because he couldn't see his body. He asked Victor how to turn off the invisibility, but Victor had disappeared, leaving him in panic. Meanwhile, Victor was running toward the town, unable to see his way through the fog. He called for the kobolds, asking if they could hear him, but he didn't hear anything in return. He figured the fog probably muffled the sound, but at least he could see the Guildhall from there. Then he saw someone release the fog and greet the villagers. He introduced himself as Francois Villemain and assured everyone that they came in peace, making him think it was really bad. Villemain informed the people in the Guildhall that if they opened the door and allowed them to ransack the Guildhall, they would leave them unharmed. This left Charlene and the others stunned in fear. Gustave instructed Villemain to move aside because he planned to break the door down. But Villemain mentioned that there was no need because he could just set the place on fire with a spell and cook them alive. Gustave responded that it was not fair because Villemain would get all the experience. Villemain told Gustave that he thought it was fair, but then he stopped when he noticed someone and shouted that it was the Dragon Master. Victor realized that a sneak attack was no longer an option and there was no way he could confront those guys alone. His only option left was to stall. He complimented them on the nice spell and asked if it was disorienting fog. Villemain replied that he expected a Night Blade to recognize it and that his Fell Bishop class enabled him to cast powerful spells by using a sacrifice's HP. Like Dead Henry over there, they had hoped he would leave the town to rescue him. But he didn't. Villemain then labeled him an honorless friend. Victor thought Villemain was not wrong because he was a friend, which meant he recognized when a scheme didn't add up. He told Villemain that he was trying to lure the heroes away from the town, which was outlaw trick number 1, and questioned him on why they were besieging Hodemar at all. Villemain explained that Lord Bradon Mora of Ishphania had asked them to recover a magical pineapple hidden in the city, and not even a dragon tamer like him could prevent them from retrieving it. Victor wondered if Villemain was referring to the tablet and why they would want it, but he understood that it didn't matter now. If they truly believed he was Vainqueur's master, it would suffice. Then he took out the horn and warned them to surrender so he wouldn't have to use the Horn of Dragon Binding to summon Vainqueur. However, Villemain told him that his eye for treasure perk indicated that the trinket couldn't bind a true dragon. Gustave approached Victor, shouting that enough had been said and that they should slay him and end the nonsense. Victor shouted that they were at a loss and that he would summon Vainqueur. He blew the horn, summoning the dragon. The bandits fled, causing Villemain to become angry, declaring that it wasn't a dragon and that it was a trick. Victor commanded his dragon to attack. It launched toward Gustave, who was shocked because he had another pet. However, he merely stepped on Gustave's head and launched an attack on Villemain. Villemain blocked the attack and smirked at him, saying that he had chosen death. This left him stunned in fear. Then, Villemain swung his sword upwards, sending him flying back. He managed to regain his balance, knowing that there was no way he could win against the two in a fight as they were each twice his level. But for the sake of the people still trapped in the Guildhall and for Charlene, he had to try. Villemain dismounted his horse and mentioned that Victor only wanted to delay them until his dragon arrived. Villemain then approached him, pulling out a gun and warning him that he wouldn't live long enough for that to happen because, as they say, one should never bring a knife to a gunfight. Victor recognized the flintlock in Villemain's hand and called him out on it, labeling it as cheating. As his eyes darted to Charlene in the Guildhall, fear evident on her face, Villemain retorted that once Victor was gone, he could simply lie and declare a fair victory. He pulled the trigger suddenly, forcing Victor to yell at Charlene to duck for cover. Simultaneously, he leaped away, urging everyone else to do the same. The projectile shattered the Guildhall window, terrifying Charlene and the children. Villemain seized the opportunity to launch himself at Victor, complimenting his courage. Miraculously, Victor managed to parry the attack while Villemain boasted about his superior level. As he nervously blocked Villemain's strikes, Victor conceded to the man's advantage but observed that most of his skill set was long-ranged. Disarming Villemain, Victor unleashed his own assault, noting that Villemain's long-range prowess wasn't quite suited for close-quarters combat. As Villemain's sword tumbled through the air and embedded itself into the ground, Villemain crumpled onto his knees, dropping his firearm. Mortally wounded, he collapsed while Victor declared that, as promised, he would claim a fair fight. Gustave, witnessing this, calls Villemain a fool. As the dragon launches at Gustave, with a swift motion, he severed Victor's dragon, approaching him menacingly while Victor stood petrified in shock. Gustave, rage written on his face, vowed to demonstrate Victor's worthlessness without his dragon. Victor could sense the imminent danger, but he was relieved to still possess his firebomb necklace. He launched a fireball at Gustave, who easily deflected it while ordering Vilmain to cast a spell and wrap things up. Victor whipped around in response to this and saw Vilmain, shaky but determined, aiming his gun at him, prepared to fire. Just as things seemed dire, the kobolds arrived and engaged Vilmain. Amid the chaos, one of them queried if the others could sense something unusual. In response, the blue one expressed affirmation, feeling an increase in power. An automated system message congratulated the monster squire for his ambush, awarding a level up for each of the kobolds. Elated, he congratulated his allies, oblivious to the impending assault. Gustave's attack sent him flying, all the while grumbling about the number of reptiles Victor commanded and labeling Vilmain a weakling. The sight of Gustave terrified the kobolds who watched as Gustave unleashed his revenge, decimating the blue and yellow kobolds. In fear and fury, the remaining kobolds vowed retaliation, only to be flung aside by Gustave's power. Victor was trembling with anger when he saw 2 kobolds die in front of him, leaving others injured. Gustave asked Vilmain if he could walk. Vilmain replied that he had used up all his spell power, so he needed assistance. However, Gustave simply replied that it was a pity. He then raised his sword in the air and proclaimed more experience for himself. With a swift movement, he cut off Vilmain's head and started walking towards Victor. Victor heard something, which made him wonder if it was his heartbeat. When Gustave got close, he called Victor a dragon tamer. He raised his sword, telling Victor it was his time to die. This made Victor wonder if this was the end, if this was how he would die again. But suddenly, something squeezed Gustave as if he was fruit in a blender, leaving him shaking and shocked. Vainqueur then told him that he had finally found him and that he could not see where he was going. He asked him how to turn it off. Victor replied that he needed to say blink again. Vainqueur couldn't believe it and shouted blink, making his invisibility vanish. He happily declared that this was much better and that, at last, he was ready to fight the bandits. Victor couldn't believe that Vainqueur had destroyed all of them and didn't even notice them before. But he was relieved that Vainqueur had saved the city and him, even though he couldn't save everyone. The pink kobold cried out that Yellow had been the best minion of all and that she should have been the one to die. The red one suggested they should sell their corpses, as that would have been their wish. The black one said that this way, they would forever be part of their majesty's horde. Victor looked at them sadly, but was shocked when a system notification informed him he had gained 7 levels in Monster Squire, Monster Life Force, Red Dragon, which means his type changed to humanoid and dragon. He also gained immunity to drain, paralysis, fatigue, instant death, and disease, as well as resistance to dire and aging, vulnerability to frost, fairy, and dragon slayer. Moreover, he gained Monster Rider, which meant he could ride monsters with medium proficiency without any penalty while fighting mounted. He could also use his own or his mount's agility for checks, whichever was higher. Lastly, he gained Monster Insight, which meant he could observe a monster and learn about their strengths and weaknesses. Charlene rushed out of the guild hall and asked if he was okay. He told her he was alive, and she gave him a healing potion. Vainqueur asked the remaining bandits where they were and reassured them that he didn't bite, he burned. Charlene told Victor that he had been foolish but incredibly brave. He told her he couldn't abandon her, making her shyly thank him. He then told Charlene he had been wanting to ask her something. When Charlene sweetly asked him what it was, he asked her if she wanted to breed, leaving her stunned. On the other hand, Vainqueur went back to the town. He was upset that it took the whole night but was glad that he finally beat all of the Manling's bandits. Suddenly, a system message popped up congratulating him for beating the Scorcher. So, he gained 4 levels in Gladiator and Crowd Favorite. This means he got a random boost when he impressed a crowd during a fight. Plus, he had a small chance of getting an item if the crowd cheered for him. He was happy that he could get an item if he impressed his fans because he could gain more for his horde. Then the system showed that he also gained Super Crit. This meant double the chances of his physical attacks causing critical hits. He wondered what a critical hit was. Suddenly, he heard a horse coming towards him and someone shouted, "Halt, in the name of the king." A lady stopped in front of him. She found out that it was true that Hodemar was taken by a great red dragon. He proudly said that he was indeed great and introduced himself as Vainqueur, Knightsbane, first of his name, the great disaster of that age, and king of the Albane Mountains. But the lady told him there was no king of the mountain. She introduced herself as Duchess Aelinor of Euskal, the second cousin of the king. But he cut her off by saying she was not a princess. This made her angry and she asked what he meant. Angrily, he told her she was not a princess, so she was not worth his time. She said she was of royal blood, but he just called Victor and said the food was talking back. She showed him a poster and told him he was wanted for destruction in Hodemar and Valbane. A bounty of 120,000 gold coins had been put on him. Vainqueur was shocked to hear the price and told her to cancel it. She was mad and asked if he denied the charges against him. He said no, but added he was worth more, at least 1 million, and that was him being modest. Then he told her to tell her human king to fix his net worth. The knight shouted at him that he dared to insult the god-chosen king of Gardamage. He ordered him to say sorry right away, but Vainqueur just spread his wings and asked why he would say sorry. They should say sorry to him because just being weak in his presence was an insult. Then he angrily told them he was a dragon and that their tiny gods answered to him. They paid him to kill their kind. Plus, he saved the town from bad manlings. They would give him a reward for his help. But the lady yelled that she had enough and ordered the knights to kill him. A knight ran at him to attack, but he just put his hand on the Duchess and pushed her away like a bug. He looked down and was glad that he finally saw a reward. He picked up the gold necklace and the system showed that he turned on crowd favorite. For making fun of the food, he gained the taunt personal perk. This means his taunts may make their targets go berserk. He raised his hand and asked who he should poke next. The people ran away in fear while he was poking and attacking the knights. Meanwhile, in the guild hall, Victor couldn't believe it. He never thought she would agree to go out with him, let alone sleep together. He said sorry to her for being so blunt earlier, but she said she kind of liked people who were straight to the point. Then the system message popped up, showing them that they gained the personal perk, Romantic. This means they got a +5 charisma bonus when talking to the opposite sex. Charlene was shocked to see it and asked why the price was so low. This made him ask her what she meant. She said that at the temple, she paid the goddess Shesha to make her dating life better and the price surprised her. He asked her what she meant by it, and she said she didn't think it was really important. But he asked her how much it cost. She said it was 50 coins, making him shocked. He asked if it was worth 50 coins. She said it was not her fault if he was easy. He reminded her that she agreed to it too. Later, when they got dressed, she asked him, "Where do we go from here?" He replied that now their quest was over, Vainqueur would likely take him back to his mountain. She said she didn't know and that she was supposed to stay in Hadamar. Then she asked if they would keep in touch. As he opened the door, he thought it was the end of his dating life. But just as he was about to leave, she called out to him. Sweetly, she wished him good luck. He smiled, wished her good luck too, and then shut the door. The kobolds saw him and asked if he was done breeding. They suggested a new generation would help with the minion shortage, which made him wonder if they were serious. He greeted a man named Jules and asked if he was there for business. Jules said yes and told him his minions informed him that he planned to recycle half their team. He agreed and asked Jules if there was a way to bring them back to life, truly to life. Jules replied that true resurrection was beyond his or anyone else's power he knew. Jules then asked if he was under level 20 because it was easier to unlock new classes before that threshold. He said he had reached level 17 the previous day, and Jules told him he could become a necromancer and raise them as sentient undead. He then asked Jules if he could do this himself. Jules said he only raised non-intelligent undead for legal reasons, but he could guide him to his first necromancer level. The red kobold told him not to do it because they had gladly given their lives for him. He explained that they saved his life, so he owed them at least that much. He then pointed his hand at the yellow and blue kobolds, activating something that caused a circle around the dead kobolds to light up. The dead kobold was engulfed in blue fire while Jules shouted at him to use the power, the unlimited power. A system message appeared, showing that he had gained a level in Necromancer and Animate Dead. This meant he could revive corpses as undead with a touch and by sacrificing money or items. He could bring a living being back as an intelligent undead, keeping both the original soul and class levels. The funds needed to revive someone depended on the soul's value. The dead kobolds turned into skeletons and stood up, which made him ask if they were alright. They stared at them in shock. Suddenly, they shouted brains, and lunged at them, causing him to panic and ask if the perk had failed. To his surprise, the dead kobolds laughed, and the blue one told him they were just joking. They were the same, except they could see their own clavicles. The orange one added that his new voice was awesome and they had met their doom, making the other kobolds happy that they were back. They hugged him, making him glad they had survived. He thought maybe things wouldn't be so bad after all. Suddenly, something was thrown through the window and he heard Vainqueur calling him. Jules checked it and saw that it was another corpse. He remarked that their partnership kept getting better. He went outside, and Vainqueur proudly showed him the gold the knights had given him. Vainqueur explained that he finally understood the concept of giving and pointed with his finger. He said it was a magic finger because each time he poked someone with it, he got treasures and levels. He happily told Victor that it was time to return to his horde and ordered him to gather the other minions. They were leaving at sundown. Victor told him that Duchess Aelinor of Euskal was supposed to lead that band of knights. He asked if perhaps they should check on her for a reward. Vainqueur remembered her and told Victor he had eaten her. Victor was stunned and shocked. He asked Vainqueur why he ate the quest giver, the king's cousin, and why he did such a thing. Vainqueur replied that she was annoying, wouldn't pay him, and wasn't a princess. Also, he was trying to be the best dragon adventurer in the world and all he received was criticism. Vainqueur told him not to look at him like that, saying there were plenty of nights around for a barbecue if he was hungry. He looked up and asked the gods, why me? Later, on Vainqueur's mountain, a sign warns everyone of a dragon. It tells people they don't have any hope and should turn around. Vainqueur sleeps soundly atop his gold. Meanwhile, Victor tells someone to leave, asking if they missed the signposts. The person questions if it is a dragon's lair. Victor says yes and warns the person that they stand no chance. All the while, Vainqueur grows angry at the noise. Suddenly, a loud noise startles him. Victor commands his kobolds to fire. Vainqueur rises, asking Victor what's going on. Victor explains that a dragon slayer is the cause. Vainqueur, annoyed, peeks outside and sees an even bigger group this time. Yet, he finds it amusing. When someone attacks him with a bolt of lightning, it simply bounces off. He asks Victor if they should have learned their lesson after past defeats. Victor replies that the reward for Vainqueur's capture is high, and their hideout is well known. He takes a deep breath and roars, causing the mountain to tremble and people to flee. Seeing them trapped in the snow, he declares the problem solved. A message informs him he's leveled up, making him happy. He had needed this new level to get a nice bonus. Victor warns him that this can't continue, that despite their warnings, people keep coming. The kobolds are worn out and can't repeat their new slogan in peace. He tells Victor he's as annoyed as him, but can't stop people from getting themselves killed. Victor expresses his frustration at having to kill these fools and suggests they move. This annoys Vainqueur, who asks Victor if he doesn't appreciate having shelter and a great view. Victor complains about the cold and the lack of food variety. Plus, the cave won't hold all their treasures for much longer. Vainqueur concedes Victor has a point. Yet, he'd have more treasure if his guild halls hadn't suddenly emptied. Victor reminds him that he ate the last quest giver. Vainqueur argues the man refused to pay him. Victor agrees but mentions she was royal kin, which means no quests for a while. However, they could always find treasure in a dungeon for a new lair. Victor explains most local dungeons are looted, but not those near the Ishvanian border. Vainqueur wonders which dungeon can hold his growing hoard. After some thought, Victor suggests the underwater city of Meropes, home to mermaids, but Vainqueur wants a warmer, inland location. Victor recommends the Antlion Pit, located in a dry desert, but a kobold warns them of needle-shooting cacti there. Vainqueur shouts next. Victor then suggests a castle in a volcano. Intrigued, Vainqueur asks about the amount of lava. Victor explains he's unsure but the castle of Murmurin has a spooky reputation. It was an Ishvanian Inquisition fortress, then the lair of a lick. The demon king Brandon Mora sent General Furibin to claim the castle during the Century Law, and the Inquisition fought the lick general. But Vainqueur interrupts him after 20 words. Confused, Victor asks what he means. Vainqueur explains he tunes out after 20 boring words, though gold, treasure, and money don't count. Victor let out a tired sigh and told him that the lick living in the castle is bad, but killing it is good and comes with a great prize. Vainqueur asked Victor what he meant by a prize. Victor shared that the Inquisition stored their wealth in a vault under the castle. The place called Gardamagny also gives the lands around the castle, even though they have long been empty. But the red kobold told him that it wasn't really empty. He explained that many burrows made their homes near the castle, including their own. The black one told him that there are many minions in that area. The blue one also said that there's a village. He asked how the village stayed safe. The red one answered that the old one said it was due to bad moon mojo. The pink one told him that they ate all the explorers for miles. Vainqueur snaps his fingers and said that there would be no more thieves and that they had won him over. He then told his minions to get ready because castles are the new caves. This made the kobolds happy and excited. Victor told him that the lick had killed every explorer trying to hunt it down, but he simply asked Victor if a lick is a type of undead. Victor told him that a lick is the most powerful of the undead. They are spellcasters who turn to dark magic to live longer. Just like Gustave and Vilmain, Furibin serves Bradon Mora, the king of the demons in Ishvania. But he simply asked, who cares? And told Victor that he would beat the lick like the rest of their weak kind. He then told Victor that they should move his treasure to his new castle. This made Victor ask him how they would move all that gold. He told him to find a bag. Victor asked why they would need a bag for the entire hoard, but he said to find a very big bag unless he had a better idea, because gold can't fly. Victor looked at the kobolds and thought that maybe it could fly. He thought he saw something on the tablet. He then picked up the pineapple of wisdom, or the tablet. Vainqueur told him that it didn't look like any vegetable he had ever seen. Victor said that it was more like a record. He looked at the tablet and found plans for flying machines in the files he could open. He was quite sure that this was why the Scorcher wanted it. He told them that they didn't have the tech to build a real blimp, but if they all worked together, Vainqueur cut him off and said his job was to watch over the project. He knew where they could find the workers. This left Victor surprised and puzzled. 1 hour later, they were in the city of Valbane. The people were shocked to see that Vainqueur was back. Vainqueur landed and called the people peasants. This scared them, and they started to cry. The kobolds laughed while Victor hid his face. Then Vainqueur told everyone that they would work for him. He paid them with his heartfelt thanks. This made Victor say sorry to the people over and over. Then the people started to work together. The kobolds watched them work. One of them asked another if they said they would leave the region forever when it was done. His friend said that this thought gave her strength. A few hours later, it was done. Victor told him that they should see if the thing could fly. Vainqueur replied with confidence that it would. Vainqueur blew it up and it flew high, leaving the people amazed because they had done it. The pink one told Victor that they were so high that she could barely see the ground. Victor admitted that it was a great sight. Vainqueur gave the order to set sail from Murmurin onward to his new castle. They saluted in agreement. Then they started to fly away while the people cheered and celebrated because they had left. A few moments later, they arrived at the region bordering Murmurin, Ishphania, and Gardamagni. Vainqueur told Victor it was strange. He remembered flying over that region 2 centuries ago, and it looked much greener. Victor expressed surprise that they managed to reach the place safely. Blue happily shouted that only their chief of staff could harness the pineapple of wisdom's true power, and it worked on the first try. Victor asked them if they meant the first attempt after they had crashed the 8 prototypes. He explained that it probably would have been more if not for his new intelligence points. Vainqueur asked him if it was the dungeon, and Victor replied affirmatively, adding that it was the castle of Murmurin. Vainqueur looked around and saw a tower, creatures, and lava, but he was delighted and told Victor it was perfect. It had lava and towers, and with the village nearby, they had a food stockpile for winter. It was the ideal place to stash a hoard. Victor agreed but reminded him that the Lick, who currently owns the castle, must have seen them coming. Vainqueur corrected Victor, stating it was the previous owner. He asked what his name was again. Victor, shocked, replied that his name was Furibon. Vainqueur then flew towards the castle, ordering Victor to announce his presence to Furibon. Victor shouted Furibon's name, telling him that Majesty Vainqueur Nightsbane, King of Albane Mountain and the greatest adventurer ever, wished to speak with him. Vainqueur reminded Victor not to forget the great calamity of that age, a title he had worked hard for, which annoyed Victor. However, Furibon didn't respond, and Victor informed Vainqueur he didn't think Furibon heard him. Suddenly, Furibon emerged from the mid-air portals, angrily asking what all the racket was about. The system showed Victor that Furibon was level 58, which seemed insanely high to him. Furibon asked if they were King Vainqueur's Nightsbane and Victor Dalton. Victor asked Furibon how he knew their names and if he was expecting them. Vainqueur told Furibon that indeed, he was a king and he wanted his crown. Furibon replied that he had been expecting them. His master, Brandon Mora, had warned him they had destroyed his agents in Hodemmer and stolen the Pineapple of Wisdom. He gave them a choice: return the device to its rightful owner or perish in his dungeon. He admitted he preferred the latter as he had devised many new traps and death pits for adventurers, but none had dared to visit. They were stunned by Furibon's words. Victor sarcastically told Furibon that he guessed death traps were his hobby. Furibon, annoyed by this, asked if he was a sarcastic mortal. Then, Furibon attacked Victor with a black curse. The kobolds panicked and anxiously called for their chief, but Victor managed to keep his balance and tauntingly told Furibon it was a nice spell, shocking the kobolds. Furibon was also taken aback and asked him how he was still standing. Victor replied, "Thanks to my Monster Squire class, I've just learned a perk called Black Curse." The system showed him that he had learned the monster perk, Black Curse. It meant curse effect, 80 SP, single spell, and removes all buffs, reduces all stats by 1 stage -5, and prevents the victim from recovering HP as long as the curse remains. Then Victor attacked Furibon using Black Curse. He hit him, but he just said, "A Monster Squire trying to fight me with his own perk is cute." Vainqueur furiously shouted at Furibon, "Stop bullying my minions. To attack my chief of staff is to disrespect me." But Furibon just launched an attack at him, saying, "If you wish to fight me, I agree. I will take back the pineapple." But Vainqueur just poked him and he was thrown back to his castle. Vainqueur furiously looked at Furibon, who was dead and in pieces on the ground. The system showed him that he had gained a level in Gladiator. The kobolds cheered for him for being the best dragon, while Victor was shocked. He asked Victor where is the treasure. Furibon should have dropped it. But Victor told him Furibon is not dead. Vainqueur replied, "Furibon is dead. He was undead, and he was dead before I killed him." Victor explained, "Furibon is a lick. His soul is held inside a container that allows him to revive at will." Suddenly, Furibon was intact again. He furiously asked Vainqueur, "How dare you touch me? I will turn your hide into a carpet." Vainqueur responded, "How dare you survive my poke? Now, I will need to use my full hand." Furibon activated his greater fire resistance, magic ward, stone ward, hasten, and pestilence shield. He told Vainqueur, "I can't wait to turn you into a handbag." Vainqueur replied, as if you can. A dragon has no weaknesses. Furibin used his crimson shield and said, you say a dragon has no weaknesses. What about your horde? Vainqueur shouted, don't you dare touch my horde. But Furibin had a better idea. He used transmute gold to lead and attacked Vainqueur's horde. The gold turned into ashes, stunning Victor and the kobolds. Vainqueur angrily looked at his horde and touched it, but it turned to ashes. Victor shook in fear and called for Vainqueur. Furibin laughed, I've lived for centuries and I've never seen a dragon make that face. Victor told the gods, this won't end well. We have to flee. Vainqueur's eyes filled with anger. Victor saw this and told the kobolds, steer the balloon away. We must leave now. Fly for your lives. Vainqueur faced Furibin furiously, but Furibin just said, now that I've taken what you value most, should we make a deal? Return the pineapple at once and I will change your gold back. But a powerful light flashed in front of Furibin and the volcano erupted, causing ocean waves to rise. The system showed that Vainqueur was in a berserk state. Furibin tried to say, maybe this was a mistake. But Vainqueur just punched Furibin, throwing him into the lava of the volcano. He then released a powerful fire and burned down the castle and the creatures leaving the lava. He shouted Furibin's name in anger while the volcano exploded uncontrollably. The fearful kobolds asked their chief, Victor, for orders. But Victor, also in fear, ordered them never say the L word in Vainqueur's presence ever again. Later, Victor noticed that things had been this way for 2 hours, and he doubted that Vainqueur would cool off anytime soon. Therefore, he released the anchor from the ground. The pink kobold asked him if their majesty would be alright. He replied that he thought Vainqueur would calm down. When that happened, they would provide their full emotional support. Additionally, they decided not to mention the incident again, a point the kobolds agreed upon. He then gazed at the ashes of gold and wondered what they could do with them. They decided to descend from the ship while Yellow suggested to Victor that maybe an alchemist could restore the ashes to their original state. Pink chimed in, hinting that someone from their old warren might assist, reminding him that their family lived nearby. He ordered them to inquire with their family about any known alchemists, as he would inspect the village in the meantime. Pink, however, insisted they couldn't leave Vainqueur in his hour of need. Victor pointed to the erupting volcano and reassured them, saying that restoring the horde was their best option. He suggested they should head to their warren for help, as it was their mission. The kobolds wondered if he planned to replace them, and if their lives would have meaning should more competent kobolds be found. He reassured them he wasn't replacing anyone. Then, he remembered they should begin recruiting in case Vainqueur got hungry. A plan formed in his mind, and he proudly promoted the kobolds from interns to minion lieutenants, the elite of the elite. He then ordered them to recruit more interns, accepting only the best because the honor of Vainqueur demanded it. Overwhelmed with joy, the kobolds saluted him and enthusiastically agreed. They then happily set off to recruit, leaving Victor with the thought that kobolds, and even Vainqueur, could be quite adorable at times. He began to walk, acknowledging that life could become chaotic, but he thought he could adapt. Later, he arrived at the Murmurin Gate and saw an abundance of sheep, which made him wonder why there were so many. He felt uneasy about the place and questioned if its name was Moon Mojo. Suddenly, a house door swung open, surprising him. A man and a lady greeted him. The man introduced himself as Croissant and his sister as Chocolatine. Chocolatine welcomed him to Murmurin, asking if he came to hunt the dragon that was frightening their livestock. He responded by asking if they were vampires by any chance. Croissant, while shielding his sister, hastily assured Victor they were not vampires because they found the concept tasteless and the sun was up. He then asked Victor why he made such an accusation. Victor remembered he had monster insight. He noticed that Croissant de Gévaudan was a werewolf, a humanoid beast. He was resilient against moon, beast, madness, and fairy attacks, but weak against silver, manslayer, and beast slayer attacks. He also seemed a bit rough, especially if the name Gévaudan was mentioned. Mentioning Gévaudan made him quite upset, almost as much as if someone were to date his sister. The werewolf Chocolatine de Gévaudan has the same strength and weaknesses as her older brother. She is a priestess of the beast god, Isengrim. She may look sweet and innocent, but she's far from it. She wonders if she should cook her prey in stew or pepper sauce. When a man named Croissant saw they were werewolves, he was shocked and fell to the ground. He thought he might be one of them because he looked familiar. Chocolatine used her magic to scan a man named Victor. She told her brother it was okay because Victor was also a monster, a mix of humanoid and dragon. Croissant thought Victor was a homeless traveler who would not be missed. He helped Victor up from the ground. Victor was afraid they were going to kill him, but Croissant assured him that they wouldn't. Croissant explained that the villagers wanted to sacrifice someone to the Moon Man, believing a dragon's rampage was punishment for their tardiness. Croissant shouted that they could drop their disguises because Victor was also a monster. The disguised villagers, who were actually monsters, were disappointed because they lost their dinner. When Victor saw a huge humanoid monster holding a lady, he trembled in fear. The lady asked the huge man, Rollo, if Victor was a newcomer. Rollo wondered if Victor was a farmer because he needed help in the fields. The lady didn't think so, but suggested welcoming him anyway. The houses, which were also monsters, moved, causing Victor to be shocked. Victor saw a person named Severus and asked a sheepman if it was her. Severus recognized Victor and told him it had been a while. Victor happily told her he still had the mark of the Thieves' Guild. Severus expressed regret that he had left them because he was a good repossessor. Victor told her his last theft had not gone well and asked what she was doing there. Severus explained that the Nightblades Guild masters sent her to establish a warehouse. She wondered if Victor had always been a disguised dragon monster. Victor explained his change was recent and asked if this was a secret monster community. Poisson explained that they disguised themselves to fool wandering adventurers so they wouldn't be killed. Chocolatine added that they would kill them in their sleep. They even had a school to teach mimics to blend in. Poisson wondered if Victor was related to a certain dragon, as he was a dragon type. Victor explained that they had come to take over a castle, but the owner tricked his master, who didn't take it well. Poisson told him to get in, and said that Furibin had been a cave troll in life. Undeath hadn't improved his attitude. Moreover, Furibin left them alone, so they didn't bother him. But Furibin grew angry when they killed adventurers before he could. He speculated that Furibin was bored and lonely in his castle. Severus asked if it was true that he had fed the Duchess of Euskal to a dragon, which excited Chocolatine. She asked if he really did it, but he replied that he didn't. Vainqueur had eaten her on his own. Poisson took his sister aside and welcomed Victor to their community. He then asked how long Victor planned to stay. Victor replied that he didn't know, he guessed he'd stay as long as the dragon did. This prompted Poisson to ask if Victor might show him around because they were new there too. Poisson also said that they used to live in the woods of Gévaudan in Garde-Magne, the best hunting grounds they'd ever had. He recalled that times were good, they had plenty of food, which they shared with local trolls. This made him wonder if Poisson was referring to the woods of Gévaudan, the forest Vainqueur had burned down. As Poisson was explaining this, he mentioned that the burning occurred after some human and his red dragon pet had arrived. Poisson swore that if they found them, he would kill them. Meanwhile, he began sweating in fear, confusing Severus. Suddenly, Chocolatine told her brother that it was Victor. Victor tried to escape, saying it was a beautiful day outside and a shame he had to leave. As he ran, Poisson furiously chased him, and Chocolatine excitedly told him to come back, as he wouldn't outrun her brother. This frightened Victor and made him call for Vainqueur. Hours later, at the crater, Vainqueur was catching his breath, as was Furibin, who was sweating in fear. He furiously ordered Furibin to come out and die again, calling him a cowardly mage. But Furibin, who was inside his castle shielded, replied that he'd never come out because his castle was burned. Furibin was reminded angrily that he had poisoned Vainqueur's horde. And Furibin retaliated by reminding him that he had been poked in the face and called Vainqueur an arrogant lizard. He angrily flew away, swearing to Furibin that he would find a way in, and when he did, he would take the castle and Furibin's silly crown. Furibin retorted, telling him to try over his undead body. He responded that he would do so with pleasure. He knew it might have started as a quest, but now it was a war, the war of the Horde. He remembered his poor horde and decided he needed to take care of it. Surely, his trusty minions had put it somewhere safe. He then flew towards their ship and saw that his horde was safe, but he couldn't find any of his minions. He wondered if they'd run away like goblins. But he was sure that Victor wouldn't do that because Victor loved him too much. He must have wandered somewhere close. On the other hand, the humanoid monsters were raising their torches and pitchforks in anger. Poisson looked satisfied, observing the octopus casting a spell, while Severus and the lady were stunned, watching the crying Victor. Vainqueur thought Victor was alright. Victor, who was tied to a tree, shouted that their world sucked. Victor told them he was not a virgin and felt worthless as a sacrifice. Chocolatine asked her brother if it was a smart idea given that Victor was an ally of the dragon, which was already angry. However, Poisson reminded his sister that Victor had burned down their previous house, causing Chocolatine to voice her fear of him destroying their current home. The lady agreed with Chocolatine, deeming the idea stupid and, not to mention, barbaric. Severus also concurred, expressing his belief that Victor was simply following the dragon's orders. In response, Victor, raising his voice, confirmed he was compelled to watch as Vainqueur wreaked havoc. Poisson explained that after their home was devastated by the dragon, the Adventurers Guild confirmed Victor, as the dragon's human partner, had led the creature to their forest. He also reiterated that Vainqueur had caused the destruction independently. Despite this, an agitated Poisson insisted that Victor had still led Vainqueur to their home and shared his despair at seeing all his livestock perish, his house burned down, and democracy's triumph. Severus apologized to Victor because he couldn't do anything, and Victor asked if Severus wasn't going to untie him. Severus, however, responded that such an act would endanger his life. Victor sighed in defeat, musing that Severus hadn't changed and it was true that people's lives flash before their eyes at the end. He remembered it had been only 2 years since he arrived in Outremont. Previously, he was an average student studying economics in Chicago, naive, burdened with student debt, and full of hope. Then, he heard a girl from his campus, whom he shared several classes with, crying out for help. Believing it was his chance to be a hero, he ran to her aid. But it ended poorly when the assailant stabbed him and the girl fled, leaving him wounded and crying out for help. He drew parallels to Japanese novels where the protagonist dies at the beginning, either by murder or hit by truck con, but he had experienced both. The next thing he knew, he woke up in a pitch-black room. He had read enough to know what to expect. A beautiful goddess was supposed to ask him to save a fantasy world. But instead, he received a dice that ordered him to roll it. Confused, Victor asked why, and the dice introduced itself as the god of random numbers and demanded him to roll it. When Victor questioned the purpose, the dice, annoyed, explained it was for his afterlife and commanded him to roll again. Victor obliged and rolled the dice, realizing his retirement in the fantasy world wouldn't proceed as he expected. The dice informed him he had rolled a 3, which meant he would be reincarnated in Outremont with only his clothes and his mark. A blinding light appeared beneath him, shocking him, then swallowed him whole. As he shouted in disbelief, the dice simply retorted that as a god, it didn't have to make sense. A system then revealed he had gained the claimed by dice trait, meaning when he levels up, he has an additional 10% chance to gain a skill or luck points, and his chances of inflicting or receiving a critical hit are doubled. He found himself in the kingdom of Gardamagni, knowing nothing about this new world, not even the language, but he learned quickly. While they wielded axes and swords, all he had were a shirt and pants, which he lost, leaving him with nothing. He managed to reach a city named Noblecoeur, but nobody would help him. He lay shivering on the ground, wondering if anyone had spare clothes, but the passersby just glanced at him and continued walking. Suddenly, he heard someone call out to him. Looking towards the alley, he asked the person if they spoke English. The person behind the door told him to lower his voice and admitted to speaking a bit of his language. They also identified him as a new claimed by observing the mark on his arm. Confused, Victor asked what claimed meant. The person explained that a claimed was someone chosen by the gods and reincarnated in their world. When Victor asked if there were others like him, the person revealed there were thousands and they were hailed as Gardamagna's heroes. Shining Knight Kia was the most renowned, but the ones chosen by the dice, like him, were deemed unlucky. They added that it was the work of the god of luck, who summoned people at random. Severus then told him that they could discuss that inside, after he put on some clothes. He introduced himself as Severus. Victor Dalton, stunned at first, smiled and introduced himself. Severus asked him if he was looking for a job, since he was new in town, and one of his guys had fallen down the stairs after talking to the wrong people. Victor asked Severus if it was an honest job, but Severus replied that he couldn't promise that. He would, however, ensure food, a roof, and friends in low places. Feeling desperate, Victor decided to become a thief. He joined the Nightblades, Gardamagna's greatest thief and assassin guild. Under Severus's supervision, Victor learned the local tongue and realized that this lifestyle had its benefits. He developed a talent for lock picking, gaining the supernatural ability to pick locks. Additionally, he learned to pickpocket undetected, given a successful skill check. He also developed an eye for treasure, which allowed him to identify the properties of any item within his line of sight instantly. Moreover, he became a master with daggers and knives, doubling the damage and increasing the chances of inflicting critical hits by 10%. However, Victor soon realized that a thief's life was a dead-end job. He would either end up in jail or dead. After 2 years, he contemplated a career change. Severus asked if he really wanted to leave, especially since he was their best earner. Victor replied that he had no choice, as the new boss seemed more interested in assassinations than income distribution. Severus understood, noting the new guildmaster's bloodthirsty tendencies. Victor told Severus that staying would likely force him into the assassin profession, a line he wasn't willing to cross. Severus, however, cautioned that one could only retire from the Nightblades in a coffin. This prompted Victor to ask if Severus planned to betray him. Severus assured him that he was a friend and made him an offer, leave by dawn, and he would pretend Victor had been hanged by the city watch. Grateful, Victor thanked Severus. Severus raised his mug in a toast, warning Victor not to return, or he would have to kill him to save face. He liked Victor, but not enough to die for him. Victor thought this was fair, acknowledging that he owed Severus one. That night, he left Noblecoeur and never looked back. Victor decided to become an adventurer, like the knights of old, seeking a fresh start. Valbane's Adventurer Guild was recruiting, so he headed there. Charlene registered him as an independent adventurer. Victor thanked her for overlooking his past, and Charlene replied that everyone deserved a second chance, even thieves. She then asked which quest he wanted to tackle first. He pointed at a quest with a rapier symbol and inquired about it. Charlene replied that it had been sitting there for a while, but he was welcome to try it. Reading the quest, he realized he just had to climb a mountain and recover a lost sword. He thought it would be easy, but he ended up tied to a tree. Something huge appeared in the sky, and people were yelling at him to stop burning houses. He was paralyzed with fear, much like the humanoid monsters that were also staring at the sky. A gigantic octopus-like creature emerged, and a man yelled out for the Moon Child to accept their sacrifice of flesh and blood. In that moment, Victor did the only thing he could. He called for help. Desperate, he repeatedly cried out for Vainqueur's assistance. Suddenly, the enormous humanoid monster roared loudly, causing them to scream in fear. Kwasin shielded his little sister, afraid, but Chocolatine thought it was quite beautiful. The humanoid monsters were frozen in terror. Victor developed a headache from looking at it, but his system indicated that his charisma check was successful, and he'd managed to prevent insanity. The gigantic octopus spotted them and angrily asked why it was them again, and when it would end. The octopus man identified it as the mighty child of the Moon Man and pleaded with it to accept their sacrifice as reparation for their wrongdoings. However, it was irritated and hit the stage, telling the man that he couldn't understand his squishy tongue movements. Skin back, but one day he would lose his restraint. The octopus man announced to the people that the moon beast was responding to them, mere mortals. Victor wondered if they couldn't comprehend what it was saying and noticed that it didn't seem pleased to be there either. Then, he told it he wanted to clarify he was not involved in creating this chaos. This prompted it to ask him if he spoke Arlaian. He confirmed that he did, explaining that he could understand it thanks to his monster-kin perk. This revelation caused the octopus man to panic, amazed that Victor could comprehend the moon beast without going mad. Victor informed it that since he could also comprehend its speech, he wanted to express how unappetizing it was. This shocked it, and it asked him why he would eat it when it didn't even have pseudopods. It went on to express disgust at his moving gametes and said he looked like a tumor with his large, repugnant hair. Victor agreed and admitted that having hair was almost as awful as being tied to a tree, and threatened with death. However, it assured him that it would reveal what was truly horrific. Then it began to recount that it was minding its own business, enjoying its once-in-an-eon vacation before the stars aligned and it had to return to work. It was on the verge of devouring a tasty telepathic spider when someone teleported it just as it had its meal in its tendrils and threw a screaming human child at it. Then it angrily informed him that this happened every single moon cycle. This revelation made Victor understand why it was so frustrated. Victor suggested it could eat them instead of him, but Severus cautioned Victor not to involve them. It explained that the Moon Man was a neglectful god, so his children had to care for his few cults. It just wished they would stop summoning it all the time. It was unsure where they got the idea that the Moon Man required live sacrifices. Victor speculated that it was likely because they couldn't understand what it was saying. He offered to help make them stop if it wished. It agreed and asked if he could. Victor replied that it would have to spare him first. Without hesitation, it agreed and cut the ropes holding him. Freed from the tree, Victor asked what its name was. It revealed its name to be Thulgathar. Meanwhile, Kwasan accused Victor of being the stranger who burnt down their home and insisted that someone should intervene. However, the octopus man denied his plea because the moon beast had spared the sacrifice to serve as its spokesperson. Victor then relayed that Thulgathar stated moonly sacrifices were unnecessary to show devotion to its ancestor. The people were silent momentarily, but suddenly, the octopus man tearfully asked Victor how they could honor the moon man. Victor asked Thulgathar what they should replace the sacrifice with. Thulgathar responded that they must moonwalk every full moon and then consume their own fecal matter. Victor questioned whether they really needed to do this, to which Thulgathar jokingly responded no. Thulgathar then instructed him to tell them to pray to the Moon Man for insight by reading forbidden texts under the moonlight, and to stop practicing cannibalism. Victor relayed Thulgathar's instructions, stressing that consuming sentient beings was considered a sin in the Moon Man's eyes. One of the people asked about cousin marriages and if they were still allowed. Thulgathar responded no, but marriages with in-laws were okay. Victor informed them that they should not have sexual relations with their own blood relatives. He shouted to the crowd that repeated summoning also prevented Thulgathar from guiding other civilizations to greatness, and that they had reached sufficient enlightenment to govern themselves. Thulgathar agreed and asked if they were finished. Victor reassured him that he believed they'd leave him alone from now on. In gratitude, Thulgathar asked him to extend his hand, so he could bestow a reward on behalf of his father. This made Victor think that something good had indeed come out of the chaos. Thulgathar placed a moon symbol on his arm, and the system showed him that he was blessed by a star spawn of the Moon Man. This granted him the Moon Man's claim, meaning when he leveled up, he had an additional 10% chance of gaining a charisma point. Furthermore, he gained immunity to madness and moon effects, except those caused by the Moon Man and his servants. Fullgather asked him if he'd like a job since he'd been seeking a chief of staff to lead his minions. He responded, feeling flattered, but explained that he was already committed to a dragon. Fullgather told him that dragons are prestigious, but they underpay their minions. He admitted to Fullgather that he had no idea about the pay but claimed it wasn't all bad, and he liked the other minions. Fullgather told him if he changed his mind, he should visit him on the moon, then slowly faded away. This caused panic, prompting questions about what to do next. Fullgather replied dismissively, "Fend for yourself." The system showed that he gained 2 levels in Monster Squire and Rally Minions. This means by uttering a commanding statement, like "die to them" or "die to me," he could increase his minions' stats by 1 stage, plus 5, for a short duration. The lady told Victor she was glad everything ended without anyone dying. Severus commended him, saying he didn't understand half of what happened, but he handled it like a champ. However, Quason expressed his discontent and threatened Victor, saying if the Moon Man wouldn't do it, he would take matters into his own hands. This declaration caused Chocolatine to yell at his brother to stop. Victor jumped at Severus while Octopus Man warned Quason not to harm their god's prophet. The lady urged Quason to stop his madness. Suddenly, the other werewolves howled, drawing everyone's attention to the sky. Vainqueur arrived, calling out to Victor. Victor, relieved, confessed that he'd never been happier to see him. He told Victor that he'd felt aimless without his presence, and asked about the newcomers, wondering if they were new minions. Quason, enraged, accused him of destroying their home, while Victor explained that they were survivors from the woods of Jevoden, which he'd burned. He referred to the werewolves as wolflings and demanded an apology. When a confused Quason asked why, he explained that if they had perished in the fire, he would have gained more treasure. Therefore, they should all apologize by becoming his new minions. Quason tried to reason with him, but he cut him off, declaring that he was a dragon who'd never tasted wolf before. He asked Victor if a wolf could be considered food. Victor responded that it depends and asked Quason if he saw himself as food. Quason conceded, suggesting that the excuse of simply following orders might have validity, causing Victor to confirm he was indeed correct. Quason then pleaded with Vainqueur not to eat them. Vainqueur, while feasting on a sheep, told Quason he wouldn't eat them unless they ran out of sheep. He then turned to Victor, telling him he must become a wizard. Confused, Victor asked him what a wizard was, but Vainqueur just stated his desire to be a wizard with a pointy hat, claiming he couldn't break the magical barrier protecting the Lick's castle, nor cure his horde unless he became a wizard. He asserted that they must destroy the evil Furibin for the sake of all hordes, present and future. Furibin, he claimed, was the greatest threat to the dragon's way of life since gold-eating insects. Victor questioned whether such insects existed, and Vainqueur confirmed they did. He had thought being an adventurer was all about increasing the size of his horde, but he now realized there were threats to all hordes lurking in the dark that he must eliminate. Victor wondered if this was a hero's speech and if Vainqueur was genuinely ready to fight for the side of good. However, Vainqueur described Furibin as a cruel, heartless monster who reveled in taking everything of value and turning it into lead. He implored Victor to envision a world without gold if Furibin's spell spread beyond his castle. Disappointed, Victor sighed and reflected that Vainqueur was likely not turning to the side of good, and he should have known better. Vainqueur insisted to Victor that he could not, and neither could Victor, live in a world without gold. He declared Furibin evil, needing to be stopped. They would break the magical barrier, clear the dungeon, and destroy the Lick once and for all. Vainqueur released a powerful stream of fire into the air and ordered Victor to gather the minions for the next day, for tomorrow they were going to war. A moment later, a poster depicting Vainqueur ordering everyone to join the war against Furibin to save baby coins was stood up by the villagers. Vainqueur told Victor that the enemy was out there, plotting the destruction of gold itself, and only he could stop him. Victor asked him if he was alright, but he just questioned Victor about the location of the Kobold Rangers. Victor replied that he had sent them to recruit new minions. He was praised by Vainqueur because he believed the more minions they had to throw at the Lick, the better. He then told Victor that he was now his military advisor, and as such, he should gather information about that dungeon, including every trap and every defender. This left Victor stunned in fear. However, he also informed Victor that he would research ways for him to become a wizard stronger than the evil Furibin, who must be destroyed. Victor had never seen Vainqueur so serious and focused. It was downright scary. Victor then asked the villagers what they knew about the Lick's lair. Chocolatine replied that they didn't know much except that it was crawling with fiends and the undead. Quason asked if dragons could even become wizards. Vainqueur responded that dragons could become anything, but Victor informed him that taking levels in the wizard was suboptimal for him and it would take half a century of study to approach Furibin's expertise. Vainqueur told Victor that 50 years was just a nap's length for him. Victor agreed, but warned Vainqueur that he would be an old man by then. He suggested hiring a professional wizard, but Vainqueur dismissed this idea, claiming he wouldn't rely on a minion for hire to win his battles. He said his gold was ill, and so was he, and that only taking revenge on Furibon could cure him. Victor assured him that his hoard was not totally gone because most of his assets were just frozen. However, Vainqueur furiously exhaled fire while declaring that a hoard must have gold in it, or it isn't shiny enough. He declared himself the great calamity of the age, stating that no one could mock him and laugh. Furibon had made him feel like a pauper, and for that, Furibon had to die. Chocolatine asked him if Furibon shouldn't become deader, while Croissant laughed at Victor on the side. He replied that it was the same difference, and if he couldn't burn Furibon in the dragon's way, he would do whatever it took to destroy him. Victor suggested an easier solution than studying for years to become a wizard. This piqued Vainqueur's interest. Victor explained about a class called Witch Hunter, which specializes in killing spellcasters and fiends. With enough levels and charisma points, he could break the castle's barrier. Vainqueur was curious as to how charisma was related to breaking the barrier. Chocolatine explained that most classes' abilities revolved around specific stats. Intelligence was for wizards, luck for gamblers, and charisma for witch hunters. She added that dragons were super charming, which is why everybody loved them. He proudly agreed and said it was obvious. Victor added that charisma also represents willpower, and witch hunters could dispel magic or rain holy judgment on their enemies, but he would need to use special points to fuel those abilities. He opened his status by shouting menu and revealed to Victor that his charisma was 79. Chocolatine and Victor were shocked. Victor informed him that his score was 3 times greater than his own, leading Vainqueur to declare that everybody loved him. Victor told him that to unlock the class, they needed to find a spellcaster or demon for him to slay. Vainqueur furiously ordered Victor to find him a witch resembling Furibon, who he reiterated was evil and needed to be destroyed. Croissant informed Victor that they didn't have many witch-like spellcasters in town, except for Allison, who had druid levels. However, Chocolatine panicked and insisted they were not going to harm Allison, as she was her best friend. Then, Chocolatine told them that she had a better idea and that they could summon demons as practice dummies. Victor asked what she meant by summoning demons. She replied that they were demon spellcasters and she summoned them, Vainqueur murdered them, and she harvested the body parts afterward. But her brother told her that they were not sacrificing sheep to summon demons and then kill them because it was too dangerous. However, Chocolatine told her brother that everybody wins with that method and they get meat, experience, fertilizer for the farm and more. Vainqueur asked Victor if he could get witch hunter levels with that method. Victor replied, technically yes, but summoning demons just to kill them sounds like prank calling hell itself. Vainqueur asked Victor if he could see that they could both gain levels from it. I kill the demons, revive them as undead, and then we turn them into minions, so nothing is wasted, he said. Victor replied that it was cruel but effective and asked him what his intelligence score was. He replied that his intelligence score was 14 and he started at 9. Then asked Victor why he had asked. Victor replied that he shuddered to imagine what he'll think up with more points. Vainqueur told Victor that he would let the demons use their perks on him first, so he could learn them like Furibon's curse, but Victor replied that he would rather not. Croissant happily told Vainqueur that it was a great idea while imagining Victor being hit by the demon, making Victor tell Croissant that he was really getting on his nerves. Chocolatine told Victor that it was okay because a quick prayer to her god, Isengrim, and he'll be fine. But he asked her if her god was even okay with that scheme because he thought he was one of the nicest gods. Chocolatine replied that, of course, her god was nice and in Commandment 7, they respect the hunt, which means they should hunt to feed or thin the herd, but never for profit or pleasure, and never to extinction, except demons and undead, because demons and undead can be hunted for pleasure, for profit, and to be made extinct. Victor asked Croissant if Chocolatine was always like this, and Croissant replied that it was her on a good day, while Vainqueur happily agreed with her because of the profit. A few minutes later, Chocolatine was done drawing the symbol on the sand and put the sheep in the center. Then Chocolatine shouted to summon a lesser demon. The sheep transformed into a powerful demon who welcomed them to Hell's Witch customer service and asked them what he could do for them. He asked if they wanted to sell their souls for magical power or some other thing. But then Vainqueur released a fireball toward the demon, making the demon panic and ask what was happening. Then, Vainqueur burned the demon to death, making it shout in pain while Croissant, Victor, and Chocolatine watched. Vainqueur happily told them that demons are very fragile, and not only did he gain a level, but both his old money and crowd favorite perks activated. A few minutes later, Vainqueur gained a level in Witch Hunter and Spell Purge, which means by exhausting 1 spell point per second, he can radiate a field of anti-magic energy that automatically cancels any spell in its range, including his own. His charisma score must be higher than the spell's effective level, spell tier plus main stat value of the spellcaster at the time of casting to cancel it. Croissant told Victor that he wonders if the eternal forces of hell might take issue with that training method. Victor asked Kwasun back if he thought so and used his animate dead power. Chocolatine asked Vainqueur if he could leave a bit more meat next time because she really wanted to try cooking a demon's heart with beans, and Vainqueur told her to summon another dummy, and he would fulfill her wish. And so, for the first time in his life, Vainqueur Nightsbane started to train seriously while Victor revived the demon who was asking him for brains, and he firmly replied, no. At the castle, Furibin laughed with joy. At last, his brew was complete. He poured the brew into a glass and sipped it slowly. It made him so happy because it was perfect. Then he began to walk, thinking about how he hadn't tasted coffee since he turned into an undead. But the sight brought back fond memories. For him, being a dungeon master wasn't just a job. It was a way of life, and it required a lot of skill. He also had a deep love for animals and an impressive amount of patience. But when a good trap finally worked, the screams of each victim made all the hard work worthwhile. One of his knights greeted him with a good morning. He responded and asked about the death traps. The knight said they were ready for adventurers, but the black beast had not been fed. Furibin told his knight this was good news. Hunger would make the beast more fierce. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting his name over and over. He looked out the window, wondering what was happening. He noticed an invisibility perch. Vainqueur slammed his whole body against the barrier, yelling Furibin's name angrily. Furibin cracked his coffee glass in shock as he glared at Vainqueur, thinking of him as a dreadful lizard. Vainqueur flew back to the barrier, stared at it furiously, and used a purge spell to try to break it. Meanwhile, the villagers shouted at Furibin, telling him to be ashamed and screaming, "Save the baby coins." And down with Furibin. The villagers rallied together, throwing rocks at the castle and demanding justice for the horde. Furibin, trembling, placed the broken glass on the window ledge. He wondered if they had to do this every day. Angrily, he ordered his knight to send in the ninjas. The knight asked which ninjas, and Furibin shouted back, "The imp ninjas. Make them scatter that crowd." Moments later, the ninjas appeared and attacked the villagers, who cried out for Vainqueur's help. Vainqueur told Furibin that he wouldn't escape justice forever, even as the ninjas assaulted the villagers. Furibin thought about how this annoying dragon had gained new levels. He wondered how Vainqueur met the requirements for a purge spell. At this rate, Vainqueur would soon be strong enough to break his barrier. Vainqueur growled at the ninjas in anger. He attacked them, but they quickly retreated. He asked furiously if all of the Lick Furibin's army were cowards. Victor asked him how the day's attack went, and he replied that it was a stalemate. Then, the red kobolds reported to him. As their chief had requested, they had gathered all the kobolds they could find. He laughed, telling Victor that he was proud of his efforts and that he had acted like a true chief of staff. He remembered the day Victor begged to be his minion forever and was amazed by his growth. But Victor said that wasn't how he remembered their first meeting, making him tell Victor that his version was now the official one. Then, he asked Victor if those kobolds were battle-tested. But Victor replied, not yet, and they made them unpaid interns. He said it was excellent and that they would be on probation and under his responsibility. Then he opened his wing and asked the new kobolds if they shone brightly enough to be part of his horde. The kobolds were amazed. He then asked them if they had what it took to become a true minion. If so, they should join the war against Furibin, making the kobolds cheer happily for their majesty. He also told them that he and Victor would return to training. In the meantime, they must weaken the Lick's morale and remind Furibin of his inevitable destruction each minute of his short remaining on life. The kobolds immediately agreed. Furibin furiously told Vainqueur that he would pay for that annoyance and then angrily punched the wall. Suddenly, someone asked, "Who dares to disturb the demon king of Ishphania, the legendary, and the inimitable Brandon Mora?" Furibin shatteringly called Mora, "Your Majesty." And Mora noticed that it was his minion and asked, "Who is the fairest of them all?" Furibin replied, "Your Majesty," making Mora agree and say, "Who else but me?" He then told him to look at his perfect cashmere clothes, the softness of his skin. Furibin told Mora that as he knew, he was currently besieged and asked when he could expect reinforcements. But Mora asked him why and replied, "Never," making Furibin shocked and trying to reason. Mora told him that his grand corrida would be held in a few weeks, and he wanted all his minions to applaud him after he inevitably won. Furibin asked him if he was invited, but Mora replied that he was not until his task was finished, and ordered him to bring his pineapple of wisdom. Mora also told him that the pineapple of wisdom was very important to his next military campaign, and that he was very upset when the Scorcher couldn't bring it to him. He then told Furibin not to contact him until he had recovered his treasure, and brought Worm's hide too because he needed new shoes. Furibin sighed and said that it would be done, then hung up. Suddenly, someone told Mora that it was unwise to leave Vainqueur's Nightsbane unattended. The lady also told him that Vainqueur was a powerful adversary, as the loss of their agents in Hodimir could attest. Mora agreed but asked the lady what that reptile could possibly do to defeat Furibin, and that the bag of bones was past his prime, yet more than powerful enough to do his will. Also, in any case, he had more important matters to deal with and asked her if he should wear gold or silver for his triumph because gold was a classic, but silver went better with his hair. The lady thought Mora was an arrogant fool, but Mora had his uses, and as long as he and the mortals kept fighting, they would win in the end. On the other hand, Furibon knew that he had kept that border free of paladins for a century, but that was the thanks he got, making him wonder why he was taking orders from that Mora brat again. He poked the enhanced scrying while thinking that maybe he should move on to a new dungeon after it. He then ordered the mirror to show him who guarded the Pineapple of Wisdom. It showed Victor, who was busy doing something, making him wonder what Victor knew. He then smiled, thinking that it was finally time to pay Victor another visit. Meanwhile, in the village, the demon pleaded with Vainqueur not to kill him. Despite the pleas, Vainqueur lunged forward, launching his sharp nail at the demon and poking it to death. This sudden action caused the ravens to flee in fear, taking refuge in the nearby trees. From the demon's lifeless body, a treasure emerged. However, Chocolatine interjected, informing Vainqueur that she was out of smaller allies to summon. She asked if they should now move on to more formidable ones. Vainqueur declined, stating that he could never grow tired of accumulating wealth, but admitted that level grinding was indeed tiring. This confession made Chocolatine pout, and she explained her need for more corpses to feed the pigs. Suddenly, Victor arrived, inquiring if Vainqueur had finished bullying Satan. Vainqueur mentioned to Victor his struggles with achieving the 11th level of Witch Hunter, questioning if the system was broken. Victor explained that experience penalties increased with each level. Killing weaker creatures was beneficial before level 20, but after this point, the system rewarded fighting against opponents who posed a genuine threat. Vainqueur asked Victor if this meant he was stuck at level 10 in the Witch Hunter class until he managed to destroy Furibon, who he insisted was evil and must be destroyed. Exhausted, Victor agreed, requesting Vainqueur to show him his new skills. Meanwhile, Chocolatine busied herself with something nearby. Vainqueur opened his menu and displayed it to Victor, leading Victor to comment that witch burning enhanced his fire attacks, allowing them to bypass magical resistance and inflict bonus holy damage. With pride, Vainqueur announced that his breath would now burn like the heart of the sun. Victor, however, highlighted that his lesser magic resistance would enable him to shrug off weaker spells, while Hunter's Resolve would help him resist mind control spells. He voiced his doubt about the exorcism perk, deeming it useless. Still, Victor corrected him, saying that it allowed him to cast tier 1 exorcism spells, though he was not yet the ultimate anti-magic tank. Confused, Vainqueur asked what a tank was, expressing that it sounded formidable. Victor clarified that it meant nobody could hit harder than him. Victor passed his coffee to his assistant while disclosing that he had asked Kwasun to send villagers with the highest classes to assist with the raid, a dryad, and an iron golem. Vainqueur, however, declined the iron golem, arguing that they couldn't eat it if they ran out of food. Victor was shocked, stating that iron golems were strong and could help hunt food. Still, Vainqueur insisted that they were not hunting weaklings, but Furibon, whom he reiterated was evil and must be destroyed. Victor questioned Vainqueur on whether it was necessary to repeat this mantra each time Furibon was mentioned. Vainqueur responded affirmatively, stating it was war, and everyone must be aware. Chocolatine chimed in, stating that Rollo cultivated the best ingredients and crafted superior tools. She also referred to Allison as her best friend. Vainqueur responded that minion nepotism wouldn't be tolerated, but he would give them a chance, expressing hope that the Dryad would provide enough sustenance for two. Shortly after, Rollo arrived with Allison, who was joyously welcomed by Chocolatine. Victor greeted them, expressing gratitude towards Allison for defending him during the sacrifice ordeal. Allison confessed that she had to intervene as human sacrifices were barbaric, and she apologized for not doing more to prevent the situation. Victor comforted her, assuring her that everything had worked out in the end. Despite this, he admitted that instances like this made him miss his home in the United States. When asked if he was from New York, Victor clarified that he hailed from Chicago and asked how she knew. Victor then had a sudden realization, questioning Allison if he had been reincarnated, and Allison reciprocated the question, asking if he too was from Earth. She mentioned that while she was not human, she couldn't complain because her new body was significantly better. Victor queried about her original location, to which she revealed that she was from Morocco, but also half Spanish on her mother's side. This statement left Rollo, Chocolatine, and Vainqueur confused. Victor noticed something on her and asked if it was the symbol of Cybele, the goddess of pleasure and fertility. Allison affirmed, revealing the symbol, and explained that while many associate Cybele solely with pleasure and fertility, she was also the goddess of the forest and knowledge. Victor apologized to Allison, mentioning his lack of religiosity, but Chocolatine reminded him that the Moon Man had chosen him as his prophet. Allison told him that she was content with her own beliefs before she met a foolish end. A wondrous goddess appeared to her, asking, "Allison, do you want to live again and restore the land?" She didn't decline and now she aids Rollo with his eco-farming work. Although she was a car engineer in her past life and golems aren't quite like cars, she copes while Chocolatine exclaims that Rollo is at level 67, fully committed to farming. Victor can hardly believe it, as Rollo has more levels than the dazzling knight. Allison proudly said that Rollo declines to advance in anything but farming until his goal is achieved. Then Rollo shared his dream to restore the Red Desert to its former green glory. Vainqueur felt vindicated because that area was indeed greener a few centuries back. Rollo mentioned that it was before the Sublaris dried it out. Allison added that an elf empire ruled the southern continent before it fell to Sablar, the destroyer's followers. These Sublaris caused a magical disaster that turned their empire into a desert, including the province of Ishphania. This allowed the Demon King Brandon and his allies to seize control. Presently, the regions resembling the world's Iberia and Africa are barren sands. Victor queried if she meant the world's Iberia, and Allison confirmed. She asked if he hadn't seen a full map of Outramond yet. He replied he'd only seen Gardamagni and Ishphania. Allison then showed him a map of the Mistral continent, including Gardamagni and Ishphania. He observed it looked similar to a rough map of Europe with some errors and asked if it was what he thought. She clarified that Outramond is a magic mirror of Earth but with significant differences, like an Atlantis-like continent, a flying Malta, and more. Vainqueur told Victor their conversation should focus on their future roles as bodyguards, not on idle chatter. Victor agreed anxiously and asked Allison about her level. She replied that she was level 24, mainly a druid and vestal. Victor was relieved as she could heal them during their dungeon assault. But she explained that as a dryad, she couldn't physically travel more than a mile from her orchard without weakening. Vainqueur told her she was dismissed, but she reminded him he hadn't hired her yet. Regardless, he told her she was discharged from being emergency food and was now just food. Chocolatine mentioned that Allison could cast many helpful spells, even if she couldn't move far, and Rollo could create various items. Almost anything could be a farming tool if one tried hard enough: armor, scythes, cannons, and more. But he informed her this changes everything. He then appointed Rollo as his chief armorer and Allison as his granary keeper since she couldn't move. Both Allison and Rollo agreed, with Rollo saying he'd start working after feeding the chickens. Victor asked Allison if she'd like to get a drink sometime, as he'd love to catch up with another Earth native. Allison responded that it would be on his dime. Vainqueur asked Victor to clarify if he hadn't been with Charlene, and Victor admitted it's hard to maintain a relationship living in different countries. He found Allison nice as well. Vainqueur then advised Victor to woo her with his wealth and dazzle her with his gold in the dragon way, but to verify her financial standing first to avoid entrusting his eggs to a poor mate. When Victor asked if he only dated the rich, Vainqueur questioned why he would share his hoard with another dragon, causing more competition later. He explained that breeding was for creatures like Victor who died often and needed to keep their species from extinction. Victor agreed, and mentioned that Chocolatine and Croissant both had class levels that could be helpful for the dungeon. He detailed that Chocolatine could serve as a healer, and they could use Croissant as bait for traps since he disliked him. Vainqueur agreed, saying it was a suitable plan. Shortly after, he was thrilled to find he gained a level in Noble and Stipend, which meant he would receive a monthly allowance of 400 gold coins times his total level. He excitedly exclaimed his hoard was growing again. However, Furibin used his transmute gold to lead spell, turning his gold to dust, which threw him into a panic. Furibin taunted him, calling him a slow-witted lizard, and claimed that silence truly was golden. Victor tried to tell him to use the spell Purse, but his advice was drowned out by Vainqueur's rage as he lunged towards Furibin. Furibin teleported and disappeared just before Vainqueur could hit him, causing Vainqueur to strike the ground and make it burst. He then told Victor there would be no more training. The next day, they would finally tackle the dungeon. A moment later, the villagers lit a torch and constructed a large doll of Furibin. A war was brewing in Murmurin, and fire ignited the hearts of its soldiers. Vainqueur glared furiously at Rollo, who was busily crafting a weapon for their war the following day. In his anger, Vainqueur incinerated the doll of Furibin while his followers cheered him on. Meanwhile, Victor secured a new war headquarters. He asked Severus if the house was haunted. Severus informed him that he had heard tales of a dark wizard performing disturbing experiments in the basement, but the house had been empty for years, so he should be fine. Victor confessed to Severus that he found this information far from reassuring, but it was preferable to sleeping in a frosty mountain cave. He snapped his fingers, remarking to Severus that at least the only undead present were those he himself had raised, and commanded them to tidy up and remove the spider webs. The undead demons began cleaning the house. As they did so, Victor questioned Severus about whether they might encounter any ghosts in the living room. Severus admitted he wasn't certain, then he understood Victor's joke. Victor expressed how much he missed having someone to laugh at his weak jokes, and Severus confessed that things hadn't been the same since Victor's departure, with the Night Blades losing their way after that laver woman took charge. Victor responded that this seemed quite normal to him. Severus concurred but added that they had never upset Gardamagna's government. Currently, there were discussions of supplying the Scorchers and Ishvania with weapons. However, Victor pointed out that Vainqueur had dismissed that plan. Victor then used his Hellfire ability to light the fireplace, commenting to Severus that at least these new perks were useful. Severus offered to make an omelet for dinner, which Victor accepted. Severus then sat on the couch, asking Victor to give him a minute. Victor inquired if Severus needed some privacy, but Severus denied it, saying he could cook anywhere. Suddenly, Victor heard the treasure chest stir. Something inside communicated that it was indeed a treasure chest. Victor informed it that adventurers these days were cautious of mimic chests, and suggested it try becoming a sword. He added that it should remain silent, as speaking would give it away. The chest asked if a shiny sword counted as treasure, to which Victor replied that adventurers could not resist the allure of a big sword, especially if it was embedded in stone. The chest transformed into a beautiful sword, but Victor advised that it was too shiny. It then morphed into a small dagger, which Victor approved of, reminding it not to eat anything in the village. The dagger approached him as Victor told Severus he thought he had acquired a pet. When Severus, who was cooking an egg, asked what he intended to name it, Victor suggested Vainqueur Jr., which astonished Severus. The system then congratulated Victor on his instruction, announcing that Vainqueur Jr. had leveled up in fencing. Victor was stunned by this and couldn't believe it, but Severus merely stated he was going to look for a frying pan. Soon after, Quasin knocked on the door and entered the house, calling for Victor and asking if anyone was home. Upon noticing a sword stuck in the ground, Quasin reached out to grab it, saying come to Papa Quasin. Suddenly, the sword opened its eyes and bit Quasin. Victor appreciated his new guard, the Mimic, and Severus remarked that there was nothing better than a warm meal after a day of leveling up. He then asked Victor how many new levels he had achieved. As Severus handed him an omelet, the system showed Victor that Victor Minion Dalton was at level 26, with Outlaw 5, Monster Squire 14, and Necromancer 7. The system also indicated that, having met the entry requirements, he could convert some of his levels into promoted monster classes. His stats would remain unchanged, but his perks would be affected. Moreover, he could combine Monster Squire and Necromancer into Death Knight, or Outlaw and Necromancer into Reaper. He told Severus that his total level was 26, but even the system called him a minion. He then asked if he had ever heard of the Death Knight or Reapers. Severus replied affirmatively and explained that Death Knights were undead commanders and tough warriors, and Reapers were thieves of souls. Furthermore, the god Death Jester was a Reaper, who had killed so many people with his scythe that it had transformed into an artifact. Victor knew that since the monster, Squire, was too useful to sacrifice, he believed it was time to adopt a new class. He then combined his Outlaw and Necromancer skills, thus his level was transformed into Reaper levels. His lockpick could now open any lock on a successful skill check, even magical ones, and he was always considered an invited guest to any magically protected location. His Knife Master ability was replaced with Scythe Lord, which granted him perfect proficiency with scythes, 3 times damage plus a 30% critical hit rate. Now, scythes also served as staves for the purpose of spellcasting. His Dead Divination ability was replaced with Helheim. If he killed with a scythe, he trapped the victim's soul in his weapon. Lastly, his life spell was replaced with Steal Life. When he inflicted damage with a scythe, he regained health points equal to half the damage inflicted. Quasin asked him if he hadn't heard the news and told him that a mimic had bitten him and ran away. Victor responded, saying it was unfortunate, and asked Quasin why he was there. Quasin explained that since Vainqueur had claimed the town, he needed Victor's guidance on governing matters. Vainqueur had a war to prepare for, so he told him to consult his chief of staff. Vainqueur had his sister summon a demon and ate it, which led Victor to question if he was essentially their mayor now. Quasin informed him that the Moon Man's cult also sought his divine guidance. He advised Victor not to feel too pressured because, after all, he was the one who brought Vainqueur there. However, Victor told Quasin not to be upset either, since he would be scouting the dungeon for them the next day. His sister would stay back as a rogue class while he would scout for traps ahead. Upon hearing this, Quasin became annoyed and stated he was a ranger, not a trap finder, and his duty was to hunt beasts, not disarm traps. Victor replied that he understood, but his intention was to scout for traps by triggering them. He added, perhaps next time Quasin wouldn't try to sacrifice his future commanding officer to a cult. Quasin called him a petty snake, but Victor retorted that, as his friend once told him, he wished Quasin would go to hell. but he believed he was already there. Victor then asked Severus if she knew whether Allison was single. Severus asked if he was referring to the Cybele priestess and asked if he was interested in asking her out. Victor responded that he had a thing for someone else, but she lived in another country and he didn't think a long-distance relationship would work out. Severus advised him that it likely wouldn't work with Allison either and suggested he consider Chocolatine instead, as she was a lovely girl. Victor queried if she meant Chocolatine Psycho, who had fed demons to her pigs and intended to use the rest to make pies. Severus argued this demonstrated her gentle nature and kindness. Suddenly, the doorbell rang loudly, causing Victor to wonder who could be visiting at such an hour. As he walked towards the door, he asked Severus what she had against Allison. Severus replied that she had nothing against her, but she was struggling to tell Victor what Allison truly was. Victor wondered why the undead servants weren't answering the door. Upon opening the door, he was shocked to find Furibin standing there. Furibin quickly used the ice chains and accelerated silence spells. A chain wrapped around Victor and a tape covered his mouth. Furibin grabbed his tablet and announced that he was taking it, stating he could kill Victor, but the dragon wouldn't approve. Severus rushed towards them, but before he could reach them, Furibin teleported away with Victor, saying Vainqueur's despair was his joy. Meanwhile, in a nearby village, Vainqueur was peacefully resting when Severus called his name in panic. He asked what he needed and was shocked to hear that the Lick had kidnapped Victor. He immediately ordered everyone to gather and announced that Victor was the crown jewel of his hoard. They would march on the castle, retrieve Victor, and destroy the Lick once and for all. The kobolds shouted in agreement to rescue their chief. Rollo and Allison were also ready to save Victor. Chocolatine seemed excited because she was hungry, not the same as his brother. The octopus man urged his team to rescue the prophet, and Severus was ready to save her friend. Vainqueur then ordered everyone to move towards their victory. They proceeded towards the castle to rescue Victor. In the War of Horde, conflict stirs. The vile Furibin has kidnapped Lord Victor, first among all minions. The Lick's evil has swept across the land, corrupting all that is pure and bright, yet hope remains. The golem, Rollo, has forged a dragon-sized ring of elemental resistance and a formidable scythe. Into these, he poured potent magical protections and his frustration from working excessive hours. A final alliance of minions marches against Furibin on the slopes of his fiery mountain. The noble King Vainqueur leads the charge, resolved to put an end to the Lick once and for all. Furibin must fall. The secondary minions guide the unpaid kobolds onward. They are determined to rescue their chief, Victor. Furibin's undead knights advance to thwart them, but a massive creature leaps towards a knight. Rollo, along with another giant figure, defeats the knight while Allison and a few kobold females heal their injured allies. King Vainqueur's arrival prompts cheers from the kobolds. Chocolatine happily informs her brother they are airborne, but Quason feels nauseous and is on the verge of vomiting. Vainqueur, taken aback, warns Quason that if he vomits on his hand, he will be demoted from meat shield to mere meat. He says this while disregarding the enemy before him. As the enemy approaches, he folds his wings around his body, surprising them. He then takes flight, bypassing them to reach Furibin's castle. Upon breaking Furibin's barrier, he lands and commands Quason to disable the traps while he takes on the defenders. He adds that Quason should be prepared to die if necessary. Quason suggests skipping that last part, but Vainqueur insists. Chocolatine uses her fire amp, regen, and strength up to support him. Then, the system alerts Vainqueur that his fire attacks will inflict 20% more damage for 5 minutes. His strength will be enhanced for 10 minutes, and he will recover 1 divided by 16th of his health every minute for 5 minutes. He instructs Chocolatine to follow him, but she thinks her brother went left and asks if they should track him. Vainqueur disagrees, explaining they would be playing into Furibin's hands. They will find his chief of staff the Dragon Way. With a shout of the word blink, he disappears, leaving the undead knight astonished. He then lunges at the knight in the door, tearing it down without Chocolatine's assistance. Inside the castle, Victor hangs upside down from the ceiling, bound by ropes. Furibin lounges in his chair, singing. Suddenly, Vainqueur crashes through the wall, seemingly invisible. Furibin informs Vainqueur that invisibility spells are useless against him and laments that Vainqueur avoided his traps. However, they can now have a proper confrontation. Vainqueur glares at Furibin, who only laughs. Furibin triumphantly declares that he has succeeded. Despite his sacrifices and losses, he has retrieved his beloved minion and can now unleash his most powerful undead creation. Furibin instructs his monstrous black beast to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies while Chocolatine watches. A large creature emerges from behind Furibin. Chocolatine thinks it's adorable and asks if they can keep it. Furibin, however, commands Vainqueur and his undead to fight for his amusement. The monster just lingered behind him, refusing to attack Vainqueur. This prompted Furibin to wonder why his undead wasn't fighting. Had it somehow broken? Vainqueur, having realized the issue, informed Furibin that his pet was unable to overcome the effects of his invisible blink ring. Furibin, however, disagreed and activated a powerful magical scan. The system revealed that they were perceived as deceased comrades, indicating that the mindless undead wouldn't attack them unless provoked first. Additionally, they received a charisma bonus of +5 when interacting with the undead or followers of Camilla. Furibin was taken aback by this revelation and inquired if all of them were similarly affected. Victor echoed his question, turning to Chocolatine and asking if she also had this ability. A proud Chocolatine responded by querying how he thought she had managed to dispose of the demon bodies. Victor then conveyed to Furibin that a true dragon never knows defeat, explaining how he had trained for days in preparation for that battle. Furibin, however, informed him that he was too late to intervene, as he had already dispatched the Pineapple of Wisdom to his master, Brandon Mora. When asked why he would concern himself with a mere vegetable when his diet consisted solely of meat, Furibin retorted by questioning if Vainqueur truly was not after the pineapple. Furibin then pondered why Vainqueur was present when he hadn't intervened to prevent his master from devastating Guard Magni. Vainqueur revealed that he knew of Furibin's malevolent plan to infect the world's gold with lead sickness, thereby extinguishing the dragon's way of life forever. Furibin denied such an accusation, asserting it made no sense, and questioned Vainqueur's original motives for visiting and whether he intended to seal the Hellgate in the basement, like the other inept adventurers. While hanging upside down from the ceiling, Victor asked Furibin if a door to hell existed in his basement. Furibin confirmed the presence of one and then questioned Victor's reasons for visiting his castle if not to seal it. Victor responded that they needed a larger lair to store Vainqueur's treasure, as their previous cave had become too cramped. Furibin, in anger, demanded to know if Vainqueur had attacked him and attempted to seize his home simply to find a location for his gold. Vainqueur countered that a dragon does not visit the bank. When Furibin asked why he didn't simply bury his gold in his backyard, Vainqueur launched a surprise attack to free Victor. Following this, he said blink to reveal his invisibility while the system informed him that his witch burning perk had proven highly effective. Checking on Victor's well-being, he saw Victor, who had fallen face first to the ground, assure him that he was fine and express his gratitude. However, Victor was petrified when he heard Vainqueur declare him the crown jewel of his horde and his loyal servant, promising to never leave him in Furibin's custody and never to let him go. Victor was filled with fear at the realization that he would be trapped with the dragon for the rest of his life. Chocolatine commented to Victor on how swift the encounter had been and that she barely had the opportunity to fight. However, Furibin abruptly ascended into the air, gathering his power to launch an attack. In response, Victor panicked, grabbed Chocolatine, and yelled a warning to his comrades. Furibin assaulted Vainqueur with his ancient meteor power, which Vainqueur failed to evade, resulting in a loud explosion. Despite the system indicating that he had taken damage, Vainqueur defiantly commanded the system to revise its poor judgment. Furibin confessed that he had overseen the decaying ruin for 100 years, progressively weakening the Hellgate's seal while amassing traps and monsters. All this in anticipation of a powerful adventurer challenging his might. Yet, the one who perishes merely desired a larger cave for his horde. Vainqueur retaliated by attacking Furibin with fire, boasting that his was the largest horde in the world. Furibin remained unmoved, activating his Zawarudo power, causing the fire to freeze just before reaching him. He then triggered his accelerated Ice Amp and Ice Storm abilities and unleashed them towards Vainqueur. The system informed Vainqueur that his ring of elemental resistance had halved the frost damage. Meanwhile, Victor and Chocolatine darted towards a large hole, with Furibin urging Vainqueur to cease their game. They turned to watch the fight and witnessed Furibin furiously informing Vainqueur that he swore to the 12 gods he wouldn't relinquish his castle. In a teasing manner, Vainqueur informed Furibin that, if that were the case, he was doomed to die in disappointment. On the other hand, in the dungeon, Kwasan moved to the side to avoid flowing lava. He then jumped onto a handle attached to the wall, swinging to avoid arrows, before diving into an ocean teeming with hungry sharks. After a moment, he climbed up a wall, exhausted, but knew he was close to his destination. Spotting an exit sign nearby, he joyfully opened it, only to be greeted by a blast of fire. Trapped against a broken wall, Furibin taunted Vainqueur for missing a shot and crushing one of his own minions. Vainqueur, unconcerned, claimed that nothing of value had been lost. Furibin warned Vainqueur that it was now his turn to attack. Using a spell called Black Curse and an accelerated super flare, Furibin attacked Vainqueur. A system alert told Vainqueur that all enhancements had been removed and all his stats had dropped by 5 stages. He could no longer recover his health while the Black Curse was active. Furibin asked him if he had had enough, but Vainqueur retaliated by punching Furibin with his Arena Warrior Fist, challenging Furibin to respond in kind. However, Furibin used a crimson shield to protect himself, telling Vainqueur his attacks were futile. Victor noticed Furibin holding his own against Vainqueur and feared that Furibin might actually win. He told his companion, Chocolatine, they needed to do something. Chocolatine suggested casting support spells. Upon seeing her weapon, Victor asked if it was a scythe. She confirmed that it was, and explained that Rollo crafted it for him because Victor had ordered a necromancer's staff. She added that Rollo wouldn't make anything that couldn't be used for farming. Victor, happy that he had leveled up his Reaper class and could now cast spells using scythes, grabs Chocolatine's scythe. He asked if she could enhance Vainqueur's abilities while he distracted Furibin, to which she agreed. Victor attacked Furibin using a power called Chill. As Chocolatine was about to break Vainqueur's curse, Furibin used his silence power to stop her, leaving Victor shocked. Victor realized his necromancy spells were too weak to affect Furibin, and that he would only hinder Vainqueur in a melee fight. He then observed Furibin's pet, planning his next move. In a burst of anger, Vainqueur attacked Furibin with fire again, slowly cracking Furibin's shield. Furibin threatened that he would turn their castle into a crater before surrendering it. Furibin then used his triplicata power to release 2 replicas of himself. Despite Furibin's intimidation, Vainqueur remained defiant, insisting that his plans to destroy the gold would fail. Furibin countered by claiming that gold was nothing compared to the power of magic. Unfazed, Vainqueur asked Furibin what magic meant to a witch hunter and used his spell Purge. The system showed Vainqueur a successful charisma check, which lifted the black curse. Vainqueur then swung his tail at the Furibin replicas, shattering them, and started walking towards Furibin. Furibin warned Vainqueur that he would run out of SP before he depleted his, but Vainqueur simply challenged Furibin to try and catch him, relentlessly attacking Furibin, who continuously used teleport to evade. Vainqueur furiously punched at Furibin, calling him an undead fly and chastising him for continually avoiding the fight. Furibin told Vainqueur to surrender, claiming that his brute strength was no match for his magic. Suddenly, Vainqueur's large pet leapt towards Furibin, biting and shaking him like a toy bone. Victor felt relieved. His monster rider ability had proven useful after all. Then, Victor praised it for being a good creature and ordered it to toss Furibin the bone to its father, Vainqueur. It tossed Furibin to Vainqueur, and Furibin tried to use his teleportation. However, he stopped when he saw Vainqueur releasing smoke in anger. He praised Victor and told him that he knew he must be reeling from the Lick's torments, but he performed admirably. Victor told him that Furibin didn't really torment him. Furibin was actually quite chatty in a creepy, undead way. He thought Furibin was experiencing a mid-on-life crisis. Hearing this, Furibin told Vainqueur to kill him because the day couldn't get any worse. He told Furibin that he would kill him after they found his phylactery. Furibin called him a fool because his phylactery was in another castle. Even if he destroyed his current body, his soul would return to it safely. He would revive, and when he did, he would rain spells upon him until they all died. Victor told Furibin that he almost sympathized with him until those last words. He said he would kill all of them and asked him if he had ever heard of the Helmine perk. Furibin replied that of course he knew and explained that it allowed Reapers to trap souls inside their scythes. Realizing this, Furibin stopped in shock. Victor told him that they should test it out. Then, Victor jumped towards him while he was trying to use his teleportation power and emergency teleportation power. But he didn't escape and was hit by Victor's scythe. Furibin was trapped inside the scythe. Vainqueur happily shouted that Furibin's evil would never taint his wealth again, and Victor said Furibin's silent screams were sweet. Chocolatine jumped with joy because she could speak again, while her brother was trapped and calling for help. The system showed Vainqueur that by sealing the evil Furibin in his minion's weapon and claiming the castle of Murmurin as his dungeon, he gained a level in the Dragon Kaiser class. As the dungeon owner of the castle of Murmurin, he could instantly teleport anywhere within the castle's confines and navigate inside with perfect awareness of his path. He told them that all that was left was finding a cure for his horde. Victor told him that he had negated the Lick spells with Spell Purge, so he should be able to cancel all of them. He was stunned to hear this, knowing that it meant he could cure lead sickness. Victor smiled at the joyful Vainqueur, while Chocolatine helped her brother from behind. Thus, Furibin, enemy of all that was golden, was destroyed. The forces of greed prevailed, and the dragon's way of life ended. Peace also returned to Murmurin through the blessing of King Vainqueur's spell purge. His wealth was returned to him, one great hoard to bind them all, and Lord Victor alone carried the burden of keeping the impoverished Furibin sealed. Then, a great feast was ordered, sheep were eaten, and demons were summoned using their entrails. But they too were eaten. The Pink Ranger was tasked by King Vainqueur himself to write the glorious chronicles of the war against the evil Furibin. He wrote that may their majesty's glory shine through the ages to come. So, remember that in the darkest times, even in the face of the most sinister of evil, the wealthy always win. But on the other hand, Mora and the lady were together. Mora was happily looking at the pineapple wisdom and saying that the primates would never see that coming. Mora was looking at the details of how to build an airplane, ending the story with a question. Did they really win? The next day, the kobolds and villagers began to repair the castle. In the basement, Victor knew there was one thing every adventurer looked forward to after defeating a dangerous boss, something even more blissful than gaining new levels. His system showed he had gained 2 levels in Monster Squire and Reaper each. He also got a Mook promotion, meaning he could help his minions evolve into stronger forms, if certain hidden conditions were met. Moreover, he had Necromancy 2, allowing him to learn and cast Necromancy spells up to Tier 2, replacing Necromancy 1. Suddenly, he heard a loud explosion, and the basement door was broken down. Vainqueur's eyes lit up when he saw a lot of gold inside. He jumped towards it immediately, declaring it his own. Victor was amazed to see how much gold Furibon had stashed beneath his castle. Vainqueur dove into the mountain of gold, happily telling Victor they should add his old hoard to this new one and watch them grow. Victor agreed, but he noticed something behind him and asked what it was. Then, he walked closer to another large door, sealed by a magic spell. Vainqueur wondered if it could be a double vault, or double the treasure, but Victor told him he thought it was the Hellgate Furibon had warned them about. The pink kobold admitted she didn't recognize the language, but Chocolatine said she did. It was written in Ancient Elf, she explained. She touched the door and told them the words said, "Beyond these doors lies the domain of the Archdevil Isabel Mora. May these bindings never break, or Ishvania will know endless hell." Quasin asked if Isabel was the mother of the demon king Brandon Mora. Victor replied that Furibon probably intended to weaken the bindings and summon a demon army on his master's behalf. Chocolatine excitedly suggested to Vainqueur that they could break the seals themselves, and he could slaughter the demons as they emerged. However, Vainqueur declined, saying he had enough adventurers bothering him in his old dungeon, and he didn't want his vault open to paupers. Now that Furibon was defeated, they could focus on what truly mattered. His sweet stipend provided him with more gold, the higher his level, so they must increase it. Chocolatine pouted in disappointment, but her brother Quasin agreed with Vainqueur. Victor suggested the easiest way to increase his level would be to undertake a new quest, but they should secure the barony first. When Vainqueur asked what a barony was, Victor explained that Gardamagny had promised that whoever destroyed Furibon could claim the surrounding lands, known as a barony. Victor then showed him a poster which stated, "Get Furibon dead or deader," and told him he was now officially the Baron of Murmurin. Vainqueur said the titles King of the Albane Mountains and Baron of Murmurin didn't sound harmonious to him. He asked if Baron King Vainqueur or Barking Vainqueur would sound good. The pink kobold suggested that an emperor was above a king, which surprised Vainqueur, who believed nothing was above a king. Victor tiredly thought, "Here we go again." Then Vainqueur announced, "I shall henceforth be known as His Majesty Vainqueur Nightsbane, first of his name, great calamity of this age, and Emperor of Murmurin and the Albane Mountains. Today shall be Vainqueur Day, where we celebrate the destruction of Furibon. We will raise a statue of me, bigger than the gods, in the werewolf village." Victor said public works were nice, but what about actual laws? At the same time, Quasin asked his little sister if she could reinforce the door, to which Chocolatine sadly replied that she could. Vainqueur told Victor that there was no greater crime than separating a dragon from his hard-earned hoard. So, his first commandment would be the abolition of taxes. When Victor asked him to clarify, Vainqueur said he was turning Murmurin into a tax haven. There would be no taxes. Instead, he would take a daily tribute of sheep and cattle. Victor mused that this would likely mean saying goodbye to public services, while the pink kobold wrote down the new laws Vainqueur wanted. Vainqueur also told Victor that his second commandment would be the banishment of all lead in his empire, as lead was the work of Furibon and thus forbidden. Victor clarified that the plumbing was made of copper. Vainqueur continued, declaring that his third commandment would be to do the thing. When Victor asked him to clarify, Vainqueur did not respond. He snatched Victor's scythe, informing him it was a non-dragon task because he was preoccupied with counting his coins for slaying liches to oversee minion affairs. Therefore, Victor, the minion, was promoted to his chief dragon advisor and doer of tasks. Victor questioned if this meant he would continue the tedious work while the dragon reaped the rewards, but he was simply cautioned not to misuse his privileges. His first duty as the chief dragon advisor would be to find a new quest involving a princess. The dragon needed a princess for his upcoming bragging day, to present as the crowning jewel of his hoard. Victor sarcastically asked if every day was a bragging day for the dragon, but he clarified that Bragging Day was an ancient dragon custom, a day for a dragon to display his hoard to rivals. It would be followed by a grand feast and the release of the princess into the wild to mature into a queen, showing his respect for nature. When Victor inquired about the number of dragons involved, he said, "No offense, but there were already many minions to manage." The dragon replied he would invite his family and all the dragons he had kept contact with, estimating a gathering of no more than 200. This left Victor shocked. He climbed the castle's roof, dropped his scythe, and shouted 200 in shock, startling the kobolds working outside. Victor agonized over how he was supposed to feed 200 dragons, foreseeing doom. Suddenly, a system alert informed him that he had reached the level 30 class cap, and he couldn't gain more levels unless he used a crest. He could still earn personal perks through special deeds, leaving him wondering what a crest was. He realized this was a problem for later, as was the dragon overpopulation issue. Something else was nagging at him. He shook his scythe, summoning Furibon. Annoyed, Furibon asked what he wanted. He asked Furibon why his master desired the pineapple of wisdom. But Furibon retorted, asking why he should tell him when he despised both him and the dragon. He threatened Furibon, stating he'd give the scythe to Vainqueur if he didn't cooperate. This would sentence Furibon to an eternity as part of the dragon's horde, forced to watch the dragon revel in his gold and endure his nonsense. Furibon called him a monster. He retorted that he was part humanoid, part dragon, and demanded Furibon spill everything. Furibon sighed, explaining that during the Century War, King Mora allied with the fairy lords of the Falmers to battle the holy kingdom of Gardamagni. They were defeated, and the Falmers retreated to their homeland of Prydain, beyond the sea. Mora feared a retaliatory invasion from Gardamagna's crusaders. One day, a witch named Melodius offered Mora a device containing schematics from Earth's storage world, secrets of weapons capable of destroying Gardamagni. Rebels stole the device and escaped across the border. When Mora's agents finally caught up with them near Hadamar, monsters had already run off with the device. He declared, "Blessed are the Kobold Rangers," but Furibon informed him that he was too late to prevent his master's plan. Once Mora unlocks the device's secrets, his dragon, and all of Outramond, will know the terror of fire. He responded to Furibon with sarcasm, inquiring about the woman Odius and her intentions. Furibon admitted ignorance, explaining that he serves his master unquestioningly, much like him. He then suggested to Furibon that the Adventurers Guild should probably be informed about this mess. The Red Kobold asked Victor if he was alright, noting his apparent anxiety. Unexpectedly, the Blue Kobold yelled treasure, startling him. He questioned whether his new sword had just spoken. The Red Kobold identified the sword as a mimic and asked why it hadn't bitten him. Victor explained that Junior, the mimic, was well behaved, and he praised it, causing it to beam with happiness. The system then revealed to him that he could promote Vainqueur Jr. and the Red Kobold to more powerful forms. This information startled him, and he ordered Blue to hand Junior over and Red to approach. When Red asked him what he required, he answered that he was merely testing something. He then touched Junior and Red, and was taken aback as Red sprouted wings and Junior evolved into a four-legged creature. The system then updated him. The Red Kobold had been promoted to a Dracobold and Junior to an Excalitrap. This transformation delighted him, and he mused that no adventurer could resist the allure of the Excalitrap. Seeing Red happily flying around, Victor felt like a Pokémon master, while Blue expressed his desire for shoulder spikes. As twilight fell, they held Vainqueur's coronation. It took Rollo the entire afternoon to craft Vainqueur's crown because it had to be dragon-sized. Rollo approached him, presenting a gleaming crown. He praised it, calling it pure perfection. The system updated him again by establishing his rule over the Murmurin region. His noble class evolved into an emperor class. However, the system warned him that if he cannot defend his title from challengers, he will lose access to the emperor class perks, only regaining them if he successfully defends his position. His currency also changed to Born in the Purple, tripling his chances of acquiring treasure from defeated monsters. His snobbery trait evolved into For the Emperor, granting his soldiers and vassals a stat bonus in battle equal to his base charisma divided by 10. His Aristoradar ability became Dynasty, allowing him to bestow one noble level onto others at will, though they would need to level up the class independently thereafter. He announced his new status: "I am Emperor Vainqueur Nightsbane, ruler of all I see." He commanded his subjects to praise him. The villagers and kobolds joyfully hailed him as the greatest dragon. Thus, Murmurin became their home, all while remaining unaware that Odius was watching their every move. Meanwhile, a woman pondered whether she was dead. She remembered being struck by a truck and was curious about a particular light. It was the year 1291 in the heavenly realm of Mithras. A girl named Kiabikel found herself seated on a chair, her gaze drawn to the light. Then, a man introduced himself as Mithras, the god of the sun, law, healing, and justice. A lady then introduced herself as Leon, the goddess of glory, nobility, art, and strength. She informed Kia that they were two of the 12 gods of Outramond. Mithras revealed to her that Earth had a twin, a world that relied on magic instead of science, a world in desperate need of heroes. Leon explained that Kia had met an untimely death on Earth before fulfilling her destiny, but they were offering her a new opportunity for life in Outramond. Joyfully, she asked them if they could reincarnate her in another world. Leon confirmed it was possible, but warned her against choosing to become a farmer or a dragon. She detailed that farmers lacked souls and dragons were forbidden until the end of time. Mithras added that the people of Outramond were endangered by an ancient adversary, the soulless farmer fairy lords who hunted mortals for sport and created life solely to enslave it. Leon spoke of the farmer tyrants who once ruled Outramond with an iron fist, alongside their dragon rivals, before their fellow deity Dice intervened. The mortals overthrew the farmers with the gods' support and the power of the classes. However, the most powerful among them, King Balor, sought to revive that dark era. The holy kingdom of Gardamagni faced potential destruction. If Kia chose to protect the innocent against Balor, they would grant her a new life and powerful boons. Disturbed, Kia questioned why Mithras and Leon wouldn't intervene directly. They confessed their limitations, revealing that another god, Sabler the World Eater, supported the farmers' vile actions. They also admitted that they, as gods, had agreed not to combat on Outramond following a divine war that nearly led to its destruction. Instead, they guided and empowered reincarnated mortals, the claimed. Leon elaborated that they had reincarnated numerous other humans from Earth. Together, they would form a grand crusade to defeat King Balor. Feeling overwhelmed, Kia confessed that she felt ordinary, without notable achievements or education. What made her special? The two gods exchanged glances. Leon admitted she lacked the heart to explain the truth to Kia, leaving Mithras to break the news. As the god of justice, he was bound by honesty. He informed Kia that their situation was dire, and while she was mediocre yet acceptable, the true heroes had already been reincarnated. Balor had either killed them or they had failed to defeat him. Now, they were grasping at straws, accepting anyone with even a hint of good karma. Their hope was that if quality had failed, perhaps quantity would succeed. Kia was hurt by the revelation, but Mithras assured her that she might yet prove to be a competent hero with some luck, albeit an unlikely scenario. Leon emphasized that there was no pressure, nothing personal. Mithras promised they would provide as much support as possible. Resigned, Kia agreed to undertake the task, prompting them to send her off. The system displayed her new status. She gained a level in Paladin, received the Holy Champion class perk, and the personal perks claimed by Mithras and claimed by Leon. As a Holy Champion, she would gain advanced proficiency with swords and spears, a 10% increase in critical hits, and her attacks would inflict additional holy damage. Being claimed by Mithras meant that when she leveled up, she would have an additional 10% chance to gain a point in Charisma or Strength, and she would be immune to all fire and holy effects except those caused by Mithras or his servants. Claimed by Leon granted her an additional 10% chance to gain a Vitality or skill point when leveling up, and a 30% experience bonus whenever she completed a quest or slew a monster. Despite the gods' assurances, Kia couldn't shake the feeling that they saw her as merely mediocre and passable. In 1299, after Mithras, Golden Fields, and the final battle of the Century War, she ran towards Balor, determined to show her worth. Alongside a knight and her ally, they eliminated Balor's minions. She then confidently launched an attack on King Balor, using all her power. Indeed, she proved to the gods what she was capable of. After defeating Balor, people started calling her the Shining Knight. The king of Gardamagni granted her nobility and hailed her as a hero. She was showered with gold and rewards. Her story, however, ended there. In 1301, 3 days after Emperor Vainqueur's coronation, someone rudely urged her to rise. Her maid attempted to discourage the intruder, explaining that the Shining Knight wasn't feeling well. But the man insisted, revealing that he was her teammate and had seen her in the most embarrassing situations. She instructed her maid to let him in. Upon entry, the man, noticing it was already afternoon, questioned the source of a peculiar odor. Drowsily, she asked her teammate what the matter was, only to receive an accusatory question of whether she was drunk. She admitted to having a bit too much wine the night before and asked for a moment to recover. After a quick recovery, she greeted her teammate as Kevin. He corrected her, reminding her that he preferred to be referred to as Iceguy and Nostradame, as he had been reincarnated as an elf. Kevin pointed out her unusual drinking habit, but she dismissed it, stating that she had nothing better to do. With most monsters no longer presenting a challenge due to her high level and the country enjoying peace, all she did these days was inaugurate libraries. She compared her current situation to a gamer who had already beaten the final boss and was now stuck in the epilogue, which she loathed. She offered Kevin a drink, but he clarified that he was there on business. Expectantly, she asked if the king had finally given her permission to pursue Brandon Mora or the serving farmers in Prydain. However, Kevin denied it, mentioning that they couldn't afford a war at the moment. Disappointed, she asked why he was there. Kevin informed her of a powerful red worm named Vainqueur Nightsbane causing chaos in the south. This creature had previously earned the title of Terror of Midgard before Balor, and was believed to be dead. Overjoyed, she grabbed her sword, thrilled at the prospect of facing a worthy opponent. She asked Kevin about the strength of Vainqueur. Kevin warned her that Vainqueur didn't gain the title of Nightsbane for minor offenses, explaining that he was considered the greatest calamity of the age before King Balor's reign. Nonetheless, she eagerly asked for Vainqueur's location. Kevin cautioned her that the situation was more complex than she assumed and urged her to read the provided documents. She read it and found herself confused about the meaning. V&V Adventure Company. Why Emperor Vainqueur? Emperor of what? She questioned if it was a village. However, Kevin explained that Vainqueur was also the emperor of a volcano. He further elucidated that Vainqueur is a dragon adventurer with class levels. She understood that dragons possess souls, enabling them to gain levels, unlike the farmers. Kevin informed her that, as far as they knew, the human partner, Victor Dalton, introduced Vainqueur to levels and quests. Since Victor acquired the Monster Squire class, it was likely that he had traded his soul to the dragon for power. Following this, the pair ransacked the Marquise of Carrabba's, seeking gold and cows. They then took over the village of Hadamar, formed an army of monsters, and devoured the Duchess of Euskal when she tried to interfere. Subsequently, they reanimated their victims as undead. She told Kevin that events seemed to have escalated rapidly, to which Kevin responded that this was only one of the reports he received. He noted conflicting statements. The locals of Hadamar had mixed feelings about the duo, stating that they were saved from the Scorcher at the cost of property damage. Furthermore, local guild officers claimed that the Duchess had refused to pay Vainqueur for the bandit hunt, leading to a fight. The necromancy incidents were, surprisingly, legal under new undead labor laws. She asked Kevin if this meant they were either fiendish villains or destructive idiots. Kevin suggested that perhaps they were both. He then reminded her about the black worm in the swamps. When she inquired if he was referring to the one who attempted to raise princesses in captivity, he confirmed and informed her that common sense doesn't apply to dragons. They are immensely powerful and have previously battled the farmers for control of the Outramond in ancient times, until the fairies bribed them with gold. She asked Kevin about the king's thoughts. Kevin reported that the king advised them to do nothing, as Murmurin was Brandon Mora's territory. By defeating Furibon and claiming the area, Vainqueur had practically declared war on him. In the king's eyes, regardless of who prevailed, it would mean one less problem for them. So far, Vainqueur had only requested payment for services rendered. Kevin warned her to consider the possibility of Vainqueur intimidating towns into giving him gold. Kevin also shared a report stating that Victor Dalton was a former Nightblade, a criminal. His apprentice, Lucy, had already suggested they investigate. The Gardemagnus Adventurer Guild planned to send a representative, but she had a desire for adventure herself. She interrupted him, announcing that she would personally investigate them. Within an hour, she would be prepared to fly to Murmurin. She planned to confront and deal with the dragon once and for all. As she left, Kevin waved her goodbye. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 4 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.